Hey, everybody. Glad you're here tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. So good to have you all here. Let's go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad that you're here. We are going to have yet another great late night conversation. Should be good. We're just going to do what we always do and come on here and talk about the world. So if you've got something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, you can send a Rumble rant. You can cash at me at CalebMoppin22, but the best way to do it is to buy me a coffee, and Kate Johnson's already done it, right? So people are already ahead of the game with the coffee buying, and that's great, and it works out perfectly. So yeah, normal format, opening remarks, roll call, then I answer your questions. Mark your calendar for January 11th in New Jersey. We are having a CPI event. The registration for that event should be open soon. It's frustrating me that it's not done yet, but one thing at a time, one day at a time. So January 11th, we'll be having our New Year's event to kind of kick off the year of 2026 in New Jersey. So if you're an East Coast person, or if you're just somebody who feels like traveling, come and join us. That should be good. The Center for Political Innovation is always doing great stuff. But yeah, we'll do our normal format tonight, opening remarks, roll call, where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I answer your questions. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the program, send me a question. You can send it Rumble rant, cash at me at CalebMoppin22. But the best way to do it is to buy me a coffee. That is what makes me happy. Well, welcome, folks. Glad that you're all here. So there's been some developments lately. One is that the meeting that was going to take place between Trump and Putin, that was supposed to take place in Budapest, has been postponed. I am not thrilled about that. And with Ukraine, it seems like a lot of starting and stopping, and I don't know what's happening. I was just over in Russia, as I talked to you all about last night, and I am very, very hopeful that we can end the conflict, that the conflict in Ukraine can be ended. But there are some important details that are being left out of the conversation in the American press by far. I mean, they haven't told us anything about this war in the American press that we can hang our hat on. I mean, if you watch American mainstream media, when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, you don't know anything practically. I mean, they haven't given us anything credible at all. I mean, it's just completely. No one has any idea what's going on. They don't know about the coup in 2014 when the fanatically anti-Russian government was installed in Ukraine. They don't know that government then started bombing and killing the people of the eastern regions. They don't know about this monument. They've actually banned the Wikipedia page for this monument, the Alley of Angels in Donbass, in the People's Republic of Donetsk. They've actually banned it because they don't want people to know why it is that Russia moved into the Donbass to protect these people who've been suffering at the hands of the United States, in the hands of the U.S.-backed government since 2014. And finally, after 8 years of shelling and bombing, finally, at that point, they had no choice. They had to just move in and protect them. They're leaving that out, of course. You wouldn't know that if you watched American media, and you wouldn't know. You'd think that this was just aggression, right? That's the way they describe it. This war of choice, this war of aggression. And they never tell you that Russia did everything possible to avoid this conflict in Ukraine. They did everything they could to avoid it, but they had no choice. I mean, it got to the point that they were killing the people there. Various administrations had come and gone. We'd gone from Obama to Trump to Biden, and it just got to the point that they had to move in and protect these people in the Donetsk People's Republic and in the Lugansk People's Republic, and the Donbass region had to be protected. That's why the war is happening. You would never learn that if you watch American media. So we can't expect American media to tell us anything about. Ritter is someone I've really had the great honor of hosting at CPI events. He's spoken at multiple CPI events that we've put on, and he was just in Russia. He was in Russia at the same time I was there, and he made this point in an interview he did with Rick Sanchez. He made this point about the conflict that people don't understand.
The other problem the president has is he's advised by people who know nothing about Russia.
Right.
Because this is as simple as it gets. Right now, I think at the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post have a headline that says that the deal that was cut between President Trump and President Putin was Donbass will be returned to the Russians and the line of contact will be frozen, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And I'm someone who says, you know, as an American, the Constitution is everything. That's what defines the constitutional republic. Without the Constitution, we don't have a United States of America.
Right.
And so I asked the American people, you guys understand that that's true, that's real. The Constitution is all important. Then why can't you respect the Russian Constitution? Why do you insult the Russian Constitution, insult the Russian people, insult the Russian nation by implying that they're willing to give up their territory? Because Kherson in totality, Zaporizhia in totality, Donetsk and Lugansk in totality are Mother Russia constitutionally. President Putin, with all due respect, has no authority to give away Russia to anybody. The Constitution prohibits, so he can't negotiate the surrender of Kherson, the surrender of Zaporizhia. And he will never negotiate that. He said so straight up. And one thing you have to learn about the Russian president is when he says something, he means it.
Well, there's...
Yeah, and that's a detail of this that they're not sharing, which is that when the peoples of the new republics voted to join with the Russian Federation, that was part of the Constitution. And under the Russian Constitution, the president does not, emphasis on not, have the authority to give up parts of the country. Imagine that. I mean, you know, the USA, we conquered so many parts of the United States with war, right? War that was not about protecting people, right? We seized California and Texas because the slaveholders wanted more territory. There was no justification for it whatsoever. Hawaii, you know how Hawaii was seized from the indigenous people, from the monarchy, you know, as they sent some Christian missionaries there. And then they claimed they were being oppressed and persecuted. They weren't, and they used that as a pretext to invade Hawaii. The USA has seized a whole lot of territory. And when those territories become a state, the president can't just sign them away, right? It's the same in America. Imagine that, you know, Trump was negotiating with some other country and he said, all right, you know what, California, you can have California. You can't do that, right? That's not how it works. The president doesn't have the authority to sign away parts of the country. That's just not how these things work. And U.S. media doesn't want to acknowledge this. First of all, it doesn't acknowledge that for 8 years, the people of these regions were asking Russia to move in and protect them. It never acknowledges that part. It always just makes it seem like all the Ukrainians are so mad that they're being invaded by Russia. That's not the case. These people speak Russian. They identify with the Soviet Union. They voted for the Communist Party, and a fanatically anti-Russian government was installed, and they declared independence immediately in 2014. And Russia said, no, just negotiate. And Russia set up a negotiation to try and get them back into Ukraine. And Ukraine didn't hold up their end of the bargain. And the Minsk agreement was ignored. And year after year, it was ignored. And they kept bombing and killing these people, you know. And so Russia had no choice but to move in. And they of course, don't tell you that in American media. And they also make it sound like Putin could just say, all right, all these people, they can just go back to Ukraine. The people that have been bombing and killing them, that we waited for 8 years, they can just go back to Ukraine. Russia's not going to do that. They're not going to do that. They're not going to say, oh, you know what? Our bad. Yeah, just go back to bombing and killing these people. Sorry. Yeah, hundreds of thousands of people dead, big, huge war, all of that. But you know what? My bad. You can have them back. That's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen, right? Russia held off for 8 years while all these people were dying. It then mobilized its entire military to go in and protect them. These people voted to join with Russia. They were added to the Russian constitution as part of the Russian territory. I've actually met people from these regions, mind you, spoken with them, interacted with them. And no, they are not going to just hand them over at the negotiating table. And even if the Russian president wanted to do that, he does not have the legal authority to do it. They do have laws in Russia, right? I know we've all been told that Russia is this big dictatorship where there is no law and all that. No, Russia has strict laws. They've got a lot of bureaucracy over there. They've got a lot of rules and procedures. They've got different political parties, the Liberal Democratic Party and the Communist Party and the United Russia Party. And they've got judges and laws and courts and a constitution. And no, the Russian president can't just sit down and sign away the territory of the people of the Donbass. He can't just give it up, right? He does not have that authority. He doesn't. And as much as you might think that he does not. And people don't understand that. People don't understand that. So I don't know quite what to say, but that's one thing I can say with full confidence. And Scott is absolutely right about that. Now, Scott makes some other good points. Scott is he's brilliant. This guy is an arms control expert, former UN weapons inspector who exposed that the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq was a lie. Whenever Scott speaks, he knows what he's talking about. He's a military expert, and he understands the situation in Russia very thoroughly. This is Scott.
People need to remember that the United States had a policy under the Biden administration that sought the strategic defeat of Russia. Trump hasn't changed that policy. And we know this because he continues to articulate aspects. For instance, when Scott Bessent says, I can collapse the Russian economy, that's part of a strategic plan to bring down Russia. And just so people understand, the strategic defeat of Russia isn't the battlefield. It's designed to bring about economic collapse, which brings about societal collapse, which brings about political collapse. Right. It is a plan to regime change.
Biden said it. He used those words.
He wants Vladimir Putin out of office, right. And that continues to be the official policy of the United States, no matter how friendly Trump appears to be with Putin. Until which time Trump changes his policy, articulates it in public, what can Russia do? Because Russia knows behind the scenes they're continue to push. Bessent's words prove this. They want Russia to collapse. They want a change in the regime. So Trump has to change that. How can you trust the actor? This is another problem with arms control. Right. They want arms control. But the Russians are like, arms control is pretty cool. We understand the necessity of it. It's nice. But why would we even begin to negotiate limits on our strategic nuclear deterrent at a time when you're seeking our strategic defeat? Because the one thing that guarantees we will never be defeated is our strategic nuclear deterrent. Mm-hmm. It's a wall I run into every time I'm trying to promote arms control, and I talk to Russians about it. And they're like, that's an old concept, Scott. It doesn't work anymore because your country can't be taken seriously.
Yeah. Let's just go over the facts. The United States told the world that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. The USA invaded Iraq and destroyed the country. Hundreds of thousands of people died. Thousands of American soldiers died. An oil-rich country was blown to bits. It was an absolute disaster. And at the end of the day, Iraq did not have any weapons of mass destruction. What else happened? Libya, which was a prosperous socialist country, had the highest life expectancy on the African country. They did have weapons of mass destruction. And then the war on terror started, and Gaddafi really didn't like al-Qaeda, and so he offered his military and his intelligence services to help the United States fight al-Qaeda. And as part of the negotiations to bring in more investment into Libya, he got rid of his weapons of mass destruction program. Libya got rid of their nuclear program, got rid of their weapons, their chemical weapons. They as a favor to the USA, because they wanted to fight al-Qaeda with the United States, they got rid of their weapons. And then what happened? The USA overthrew the Libyan government. And, there was an uprising during the Arab Spring, and they didn't have popular support. They were losing. So the USA bombed Libya and bombed it over and over and over again, and ultimately destroyed the Libyan government. And Gaddafi, a great African leader, was killed in one of the most brutal, ugly ways imaginable. Now Libya, which was once the most prosperous country on the African continent, has been reduced to complete rubble. It is a disaster. People are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out of Libya. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. And they got rid of their weapons of mass destruction. And look what happened. Iraq was accused of having weapons of mass destruction, but they didn't have them. And look what happened. And I'm just going over the facts here because these kind of things are important. These kind of things do tend to matter. So let's go over this. Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction, got accused of having them, got invaded, all kinds of people died. Libya had weapons of mass destruction, gave them up in exchange for the United States, partnering with them and lifting some of the sanctions. And then they got invaded and destroyed. And then what happened? Iran had a peaceful nuclear energy program. Iran has never sought the atomic bomb. They are not in favor of having nuclear weapons. The supreme leader of Iran forbids them to develop nuclear weapons. They don't have nuclear weapons, but they had a peaceful nuclear energy program. And so then what happened? They gave it up at the negotiating table. The United States had long negotiations with Iran and said to Iran, hey, Iran, if you will give up most of your nuclear power plants, we will put in writing and acknowledge that you have the right to have nuclear power plants if you agree to give up almost all of them. And so Iran made a deal with the United States, and it shut down almost all of its nuclear power plants. And in exchange for that, the USA lifted some sanctions. And then Trump got into office, and he put more sanctions on Iran, and there were more sanctions imposed on Iran. And then the USA murdered Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani. And Iran's economy got worse. They didn't get any of what they'd been promised. The sanctions were reimposed. Their top general got murdered. And just recently, the USA bombed Iran. So what did Iran get by giving up most of their peaceful nuclear energy program? What did they get for it? Nothing. It just made them more vulnerable to attack. So this notion that Russia is going to sit down with the United States and it's going to be a negotiation carried out in good faith, it's going to be very difficult. Look what happened recently. As Israel was negotiating with the Palestinians, multiple times they killed the negotiator, right? Hamas, had people that were negotiating on behalf of the Palestinians. And multiple times, as the negotiations were taking place, Israel killed the negotiators with the United States knowing full well that they were going to do it. And so it's kind of hard to negotiate with a country that doesn't keep its promises. Promises are broken over and over and over again. And as a result, it makes it very, very hard for the United States to negotiate. And that's why I think this negotiation to end the war in Ukraine is taking so long. It's taking so long because there's no trust. How do you trust a country that has done what the United States did? Before the USA bombed Iran, before Israel sneak attacked Iran, Iran was about to start negotiating with the United States. And they were just days away from the USA and Iran negotiating. And then Israel snuck attack and bombed Iran this summer. And the USA knew about it and didn't try to stop them. How do you negotiate with a country that is so consistently violating the honesty and the trust necessary in order to negotiate. You can't do it. And that's what people don't understand. And that's what's making these negotiations so difficult. I believe, and I will hang my hat on this, it is our job as anti-imperialists, as advocates of peace and advocates for American working families, it is our job to push for peace negotiations. If we can push for the United States to negotiate with Russia to end the conflict, right, to negotiate with Russia, to de-escalate, we should do it. And it doesn't help if we just get up and say, oh, there's no hope. But we do have to be honest at the same time. There is hope. I believe that this war will end. It might take a long time, and I'm certainly not thrilled with the very, very slow pace through which this war is ending. And it's certainly not something I'm happy about. But at the same time, we have to advocate for this war to end. And we have to do our best to make it happen, right? And that if we just sit on the internet complaining and saying, oh, well, there's no hope, that's a way to avoid responsibility. We as individuals could actually push for peace. We could make a difference in the conversation, and I think we already have. We could make a difference in the conversation, so we need to do our best to do that. Now, I was in Russia for the World Youth Festival last year. I was just there last week as well. I showed you the video of that, but I want to show you an interview I did when I was there last year for the World Youth Festival. We'll show that, and we'll talk about some other things. I got a lot of things to talk about here tonight. My name is Caleb Maupin. I'm the leader of the Center for Political Innovation. I'm the chair of the U.S. delegation that attended the World Youth Festival. Well, the first time I ever visited Russia was for the 2017 World Youth Festival. And then I have been to Moscow a number of times since then. I've also been to Yalta, and now I'm back here in Sochi. And I find Russia to be a very lovely place, full of kind, welcoming people, people that are very charming, people that want to help you have a good time and really would like to connect with the rest of the world. They tell us that Russia is an isolated country, and that's just a lie. I mean, Russia has many friends and deep relationships with countries all across the planet, in Africa, Asia, Latin America, etc. And I hope that Russia's relationship with the United States can improve, and that's why I'm here. I'd like to see better relations between the United States and Russia, and I don't like the direction our leaders are currently taking things. So I was asked to talk about stereotypes. One stereotype of Russia that we get in American media a lot is that Russia is a country full of criminals, that if you come here, you'll be kidnapped, people will rob you at gunpoint, etc. I haven't seen any of that. I haven't seen any criminal activities. I haven't seen any guns the whole time I've been here. I haven't seen anything related to crime or drugs or anything like that. I see a very safe place. I would bring my family here. If I had children, I would be happy to go on vacation here in Sochi, take my family to the beach. I'm not seeing criminal activity. I'm not seeing anything to make me afraid to come here. The image that we have of Russia and the United States is of some kind of, militaristic third world society where people are always engaged in criminal activities. I don't see that at all. I see a very modern, industrial, civilized country that has trade and diplomatic relations with a number of countries. I was also asked what parts of Russia I'd like to visit. I'd like to see more of southern Russia. I'm here in Sochi, this is southern Russia, but I'd like to see some of the regions that are in the southern regions, some of the more Islamic regions, how they differ from life in Moscow and St. Petersburg, etc. I'd like to get to know the different nationalities of Russia, the different republics. That's something I would like to do. I'd also like to see the new republics because, again, in the U.S. media, we're told that these areas are conquered, these people are occupied. Well, I know that that's not true because I look at alternative media, but I'd like to talk to the people. And at the festival, I had the pleasure of meeting people from Donetsk, meeting people from Lugansk. I've been to Yalta and Crimea, so I'd like to see the new republics as well. But I would really like Americans to see that this is a very civilized country. This is a country with a lot of wealth and a lot of cultural heritage, whether it's the music of Tchaikovsky or Shostakovich or the writing of Maxim Gorky. And the people here have a really deep knowledge of their history and culture. A lot of Americans can't even find their own country on a map, but you talk to Russian young people, they are very knowledgeable about where they came from, the history of their country, and they're also plugged into a
project of national rejuvenation and growth. They're enthusiastic about what their government is doing. Their government is mobilizing them to be part of a project to raise up productive forces and develop a very different atmosphere from the West, very optimistic as opposed to the pessimism coming out of Western civilization at this time. I would love to travel around Russia and get to know the country better, get to know the soul of the Russian people, see the different regions. The potatoes are very good, the way you have your potatoes and you serve them with the spices and all of that. Also some of the stew that you make, the beef stew with potatoes and the different things, that's also very, very nice. The spices make it very, very tasty. Also, I will say I love your lamb, because I grew up in Ohio. My grandfather was a farmer, and he raised sheep, and we would eat lamb for Easter and for other holidays. And I had the opportunity to visit a restaurant at Sochi and have some of your lamb, and it's very well prepared. You prepare your lamb very, very well. So I love your lamb as good. And you can't get lamb as very much in the United States. It's more rare. We have a lot of beef in the United States, but your lamb here is delicious. My wish is that many foreigners will come to Russia and get to know the people here, and that this will strengthen the bond and the growth of the new economy that is emerging in the world with the BRICS countries, and that trade will prosper between countries, and growth and optimism and the belief that tomorrow can be better than today. This will be fostered and cultivated by what you're doing with your project with foreigners in Russia.
Yeah. And, I think we need to do our best to connect the United States with Russia and with China and with Iran and with Venezuela and with Cuba and with Nicaragua and Vietnam and all the anti-imperialist countries. That the only future America is going to have is going to be with the world beyond the BRICS. The world beyond the Western financial system. That the Western financial system is doomed, and it's doomed for very specific reasons. It's doomed because of technology. And that's what I have spent so much time writing about, the tendency of the falling rate of profit. And the fact that we live in an economic system that the more efficient production becomes and the more technology advances, the more economically unstable life is, the more precarious workers are, and the harder it is to survive. And that's something that a lot of people don't get. But this is something that you can find in the works of Marx that nobody who's talking about Marx nowadays ever talks about. All the people who talk about Marx, it pisses me off. But all the people who talk about Marxism nowadays, all they talk about is, in the factory, there's the employer who owns it, and there's the worker who works there, and that's not fair. Well, okay. Congratulations. You have graduated from Marxist kindergarten. All right. That's not fair. It's not fair. Marx spent his whole career, going back to the Communist Manifesto, talking about how capitalism had brought into the world a problem that had never existed before. Poverty created by abundance. The problem of glut, G-L-U-T. People becoming homeless because there are too many houses. People becoming hungry because there is too much food. The market becoming so saturated with goods that people lose their jobs, right? And that was a deeply unnatural problem that had never existed before. And these Marxists never talk about this, right? That the U.S. government buys all kinds, millions and billions of dollars worth of cheese and buries it in a cave in Missouri. No one gets to eat it. Why does the U.S. government bury cheese in a cave? To keep the price of dairy high enough that all the farms don't go out of business. That's insane. What sense does that make? We have a world where people are hungry, but instead of feeding those people, our government buys food and buries it in order to make sure that the farms don't go out of business because there's too much milk, there's too much dairy. That's not rational. And there are just so many examples of this problem. And the more technology advances, the bigger this problem gets. And that around the world, there are a number of governments that emerge that don't have this problem. And why don't they have this problem? Because profits are not in command. There are a number of governments that emerged during the 20th century and since then that emerged as a result of anti-colonial revolutions that have a very powerful state that controls the means of production, that controls the economy. They have private corporations, etc. But in addition to having private corporations that make profits, etc., you have a state that ultimately controls and plans the economy. And as a result, they can keep growing because profits are not in command. They have 5-year economic plans, and they don't have this problem. And that ultimately, that's what we are going to have in America. We're going to need a government of action that will fight for working families, that will break the power of Wall Street and the big corporations and take control of the means of production. Society as a whole needs to come together and take control of the means of production. And around the world, there have been a number of countries that have been kept in chronic poverty by the domination of the British Empire and Wall Street. And they rose up and they kicked out the colonizers and the imperialists. And in the process of doing that, they built a government, a strong anti-colonial government. And that anti-colonial government controls the economy. And as a result, they can keep growing. They don't have the built-in instability of the capitalist system. They don't have this problem of poverty created by abundance. This is a huge amount of what Marx wrote about. And none of the Western communists talk about this. They never talk about this. All they talk about is workers, factory workers and factory owners. It's unfair. They talk about income inequality. Marx spent a lot of his time writing about how he had absolutely no interest in redistributing income. He wanted to change property relations. He wanted to have the means of production not function according to profits. And the understanding that capitalism has this built-in problem of overproduction, value crisis, and the tendency of the falling rate of profit, and that poverty is created by abundance, poverty exists amid plenty, that is an understanding that I have that makes me very unique, and I'm glad I have it. And I didn't really understand this stuff until the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. I had been in Marxist groups for years prior to that, but it wasn't until then that I really came to understand the problems of the capitalist system and why it has this built-in problem. And I'm very thankful that I came to that understanding. And I'm also very thankful that I understand why China has a lot of billionaires. There's a lot of inequality there. There's some people that are very rich, some people that are not as rich, but they keep growing and their economy keeps growing. Why? Because profits are not in command, and therefore they don't have the problem of glut. They don't have the tendency of the falling rate of profit. They don't have overproduction and value crisis. They can keep growing, and the more wealth they produce, the wealthier the country gets. Whereas over here, the more wealth we produce and the more technology advances, the poorer people get, the less stable the economy becomes. And that this built-in problem of the capitalist system, which nobody talks about, none of the leftists ever talk about it, right? Well, that problem has been overcome in big sections of the world. And you have great leaders like Ibrahim Traore, who's building up Burkina Faso right now. You have great leaders like Nicolas Maduro, who's done so much to advance the living standards of his people. And the Nicaraguans, with their socialism, Christianity, and solidarity, and all over the world, you have revolutionary governments. You got the Vietnamese market-oriented socialist economy, socialist-oriented market economy. You've got China, socialism with Chinese characteristics. You've got Russia and the way Putin restructured their economy to be centered around state-run gas companies that subsidize. You have Gazprom and Rosneft. There's a whole section of the world that isn't capitalist in the sense of profits being in command. Again, Marxists, they don't know what capitalism means. They say, well, Caleb, China is capitalist because they have money. Well, no shit, Sherlock. Of course they have money. China's capitalist because they have rich people. No shit, Sherlock. Of course they have rich people. Capitalism is production organized for profit. That's what capitalism is. It's profits in command. And when society as a whole takes control of the economy and profits are not in command, even if people are making profits here and there, but if profits are not in command, you have a government that represents an anti-colonial mass movement of the people that takes control of the state and organizes the economy. That's not capitalism any longer in the way I understand it. Now, I'm trying to move past any of this terminology, socialism, capitalism, all of this, because it's all lost any meaning, right? There was a time where so few people in America were socialists and communists that I could explain this. Nowadays, I can't explain it. Nowadays, people who call themselves socialists have no fucking clue what they're talking about, and they're very obnoxious people who say things that I vehemently disagree with. They say growth is bad. They want to take wealth from the rich people and give it to the poor people to punish those rich people. They want billionaires to not exist. They think economic growth is bad. They think capitalism can produce endless economic growth, but somehow that's bad, right? They promote degrowth excessively, right? Jason Hickel and AOC and Bernie, they think growth is somehow bad. And they are basically walking stereotypes, walking incarnations of what the right wing has always told us communism is: a movement that worships poverty, a movement of hate and destruction and jealousy and resentment. And the whole point of socialism, if you read Marx, and especially if you read what was written later, and especially, if you look at some of the developments made by Lynn Marcus and his writing about dialectical economics and other things, the whole point of socialism is to enable human progress to advance, to enable technology to no longer lead to poverty, and to enable human beings to create so much wealth and abundance that the state itself can wither away, that we can have a society with so much wealth and abundance that we don't need a government, right? That's the idea. The goal is to create vast material abundance. And the main barrier to that is the irrational profit system. And that right now, the way the big banks and monopolies in Western countries maintain their dominance is by going around the world and beating down countries, preventing them from building up their own industries, keeping them in poverty. And that's not enough anymore. Now they're doing that in the home country. And they basically have to forcibly degrow and impoverish the world so they can stay at the top. And that's got to be gotten rid of. And the Western system is doomed because it's holding back history. Just like the Roman Empire was doomed. The Roman Empire was an empire based on holding back history, maintaining slavery when around the world feudalism was starting to emerge, which is a more efficient mode of production than slavery. And the Roman Empire was a slave empire, and it was holding back history. And so it fell apart, right? And that the Western system right now is holding back history. It's got an irrational economic system where profit is in command, and as a result, poverty is created by abundance. And ultimately, the West is falling apart because of that. And the West needs to have constant wars. It's addicted to war. It can't not have war. It can't not have war. It can't not have prisons for profit. It can't not, have opioids and people getting overprescribed and addicted to drugs. I mean, the system has become cannibalistic. We've entered a fourth stage of imperialism, where imperialism is starting to deteriorate into barbarism. Capitalism went through 4 stages, right? As it emerged from feudalism, you had the primitive accumulation. That was the first stage of capitalism. And the primitive accumulation was when the wealthy people, the people that are now the rulers of the world, seized the world for themselves as private property. And they kicked the peasants off their land, and they kicked the Scottish Highlanders off their land, and they hung and executed people for the crime of being homeless, and they cleared out the commons, the enclosure movement. That was the beginning. And then they seized Africa, and they seized Latin America, and they seized the Americas from the Native Americans, and they went to Africa and they took African people as slaves, and they dragged them over here and killed millions of them in the process in the Middle Passage. And there was a mass theft that originated the capitalist system. The free market emerged as a result of what was called the primitive accumulation of capital, which was mass theft, genocide on a scale that humanity had never seen. First, genocide against the white people in Europe, against the peasantry, against different ethnic groups in Europe. Then genocide against indigenous people. And it just kept going. It was the primitive accumulation. And out of the primitive accumulation emerged the industrial system. And the industrial system was factory owners and wage workers, where people started renting themselves out to bosses. You no longer had landowners and peasants. You had wage workers and employers. And that's where this problem that had never existed before, the problem of overproduction, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, happened. And every 10, 15 years, the world economy would come to a grinding halt because they'd created so much wealth. And there would be a panic on the stock market, and people would lose their jobs. There'd be mass unemployment and hunger because so much wealth had been produced. A crisis that would have seemed an absurdity in any other system, of people being hungry because too much food was created, people being homeless because there are too many houses. And as technology advanced, these crises became more frequent. And so out of the industrial system, you obviously you had to stabilize the industrial system because it would shut down every couple years because there would be a glut, because there'd be too many goods, and it would shut down every couple years. So who bails you out when the economy is coming to a grinding halt? Bankers. And bankers, financiers, became dominant over industries, right? And bankers began to assert themselves. You got the rise of the New York Stock Exchange. You got the Federal Reserve Bank eventually, emerging. And bankers became dominant. And suddenly, with the rise of monopoly capitalism in the late 1890s, early 1910s, you got governments and bankers teaming up to go and invade countries and use countries as captive markets and invade countries. The British went to India. They burned all the textile looms. They forced the people of India to import all their cloth from Britain. And there's so many examples of this, of governments that basically work for bankers and go around the world seizing countries and preventing countries from developing their own economy and their own resources, the export of capital. And that's the third stage. That's called imperialism. And what made imperialism work was at the same time they were going to Africa and Asia and Latin America and impoverishing people and destroying nations. At the same time they were doing that, they were building up a layer of well-paid, comfortable industrial workers in the homeland. You had American auto workers and American steel workers who had unions and got decent pay. And as a result, they had a comfortable life, and they supported the wars, and they were racist, and they were supporting empire. You had what was called the aristocracy of labor, of well-paid workers in the homeland who got kind of a bribe. They got some of the crumbs from the imperialist table. And so we had a lot of prosperity and peace here in the United States. We had a strong economy because we had an aristocracy of labor, of high-paid workers who benefited from imperialism. But now that doesn't exist anymore. They've closed down all those auto plants. They've closed down all those steel mills. They don't need them anymore. And it's not just offshoring. It's largely just technology. Technology has gotten to the point that they don't need them anymore. The role of technology has eliminated workers from the assembly line, and the computer revolution that came out of the Second World War and the decoding machine and all of that. Now, as a result of the computer revolution, there's very, very little human labor involved in production. They do everything they can to eliminate workers from production. And workers create the value. And if you're not hiring people, they can't buy the products. And now we're back where we were. We're having a big crisis of overproduction. And they've got all these artificial mechanisms to keep the economy going. And it used to be they would do these artificial mechanisms once a year, twice a year. Now it's constant. It used to be they'd have a big war to get the economy going again. Now we have to have war constantly. We cannot not have war. We become addicted to war because our economy can't do without it, right? It's like a drug addict, right? A drug addict, right? It's like, he says, oh, okay, well, I like to party, right? So one time at a party, he uses heroin. And then, a couple months later, he says, sure, I like to party, and he uses heroin again. But then it gets to the point that he's an addict where he has to use heroin every day because he's become dependent on it, right? And that's how it was. War was a mechanism for, every so often we could go and have a war to get the economy going. Now we're at the rock bottom stage where they can't not have war. We have to have war to be normal. We have to have war to be normal just for the economy to keep moving. And we've got prisons for profit and all of this. And this is the fourth stage, destructive accumulation or barbarism, right? This is capitalism eating itself. Nazi Germany was one of the first examples of this. And the rise of Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, that was the very beginning, right? Hitler saved the German economy by militarizing it, by making it a war-centered economy, by creating a network of concentration camps, the world's first prison industrial complex, and the world's first military industrial complex. And they basically, in order to get the German economy going again, the industrialists under the leadership of Holomer Schacht, they found Hitler to be the dictator, and then they created a military industrial complex, they created a prison industrial complex, and suddenly Germany could keep going but it wasn't going by creating more value. It was going by creating bombs and tanks and weapons to have big wars, and it was going by reducing a big layer of their population to being slaves, to being a slave labor underclass in the concentration camps, and breaking the unions. And so Nazi Germany was able to get its economy going again, but by 1939, their economy was collapsing and they had to have World War II. And there's a lot of people, there's this whole industry now of World War II revisionism who say, well, actually, Hitler didn't want to have a war, blah, blah, blah. There might be some truth to that. Doesn't matter, right? Hitler had to have a war because the German economy, the only way he had rebooted it was with war. And it was starting to slow down again. And they needed more slave laborers to work in their factories. And they needed to send people in other places. And the German economy had been set up around militarism, war, and slave labor. And they had to keep going. They had no choice. That's how their economy worked. And it was barbarism. And what Nazi Germany did in the 1930s is basically what the Western economy does all the time now. They did it out of desperation in the 1930s during the Great Depression. Now we do it all the time. We have a prison industrial complex in the West all the time, right? We have war all the time, right? It's constant. And this is imperialism, the imperialist economic system collapsing from within. This is the fourth stage of destructive accumulation. This is imperialism degenerating into barbarism. And yet the BRICS countries keep rising and they keep getting stronger and more prosperous and wealthy. They don't have these problems. And our message is that we need an anti-imperialist, anti-globalist government here. We need a government of action to fight for working families, to break America out of this dying system, of this destructive accumulation of imperialism in its death stage. And we need a popular government that will connect us with the rising economy around the world where profits are not in command. This is the only message that is rational and founded in economics, right? All kinds of people are out there explaining this, right? Most leftists, if you ask them what imperialism is, they'll say imperialism is like white people being really mean because their lives are too good because they're white, and that's not a rational understanding. Yes, white people benefit because white people were at the center of imperialism and colonialism, and that was primitive accumulation and eventually imperialism. And we have an answer to these problems that is founded in economics. We understand this stuff. Right? Most people that call themselves socialists will say socialism is about how the worker and the employer, it's not fair. No, we say that profit being in command and being the deciding force in society without rational central control of your nation's economy leads to the irrationality and value crisis, etc. Right? That's what we say. That's what we understand, right? And that you need a government of action to fight for working families. You need a planned economy. And also, that planned economy has to have markets to be part of it. We need entrepreneurs. We need small business owners. We need people to open bars and restaurants and hotels. We need people to invent new types of clothing and fashion. We need people to invent new computer programs. There's a room for innovators. And in fact, the way modern socialist economies in Venezuela and Vietnam and Cuba and Nicaragua and China, the way they operate is they invest. Every time I go to Russia, I go to these high-achieving youth gatherings that I go to. And at these high-achieving youth gatherings, I hear Russia talking to its highest science young people, its highest mathematicians, and saying, we want to invest in you. Don't run away to the West, right? Don't run away and be part of brain drain. We'll find a way to have the government invest in you. Russia has enabled thousands of people to become farmers, right? They're having a farming boom in Russia, the biggest harvest they've ever had, because with their central planned economy, with their government-controlled oil and gas, they use the money to lend it to people to go to fresh virgin land and open up a new farm and, grow wheat and have cows and have steak. And it's amazing, right? Right. And that what Americans think capitalism is, which is working hard and making money, socialism, anti-imperialist countries are better at that than the West is. And that is not contrary. In fact, that's an essential part of what 21st century socialism looks like. In Burkina Faso right now, Ibrahim Traore is investing in small business owners. And in the West, as the economy is getting worse, the way that they are stabilizing the economies is the big monopolies are crushing small business owners. Don't even think about trying to start a small business in the West right now. All the regulations, all the taxes you're subjected to, they crush you. They crush you. And we're moving toward a society where you can't really have a successful small business, but everyone's becoming a little micro contractor, right? Everyone's becoming an Uber driver. That's the way the Western system is going, is instead of, having a regular job with a contract with regular benefits. Oh, no. Now in the West, everyone's renting themselves out to the boss as a micro entrepreneur, as an Uber driver, etc. And we're competing with other people to get rented out by the boss. We're moving toward what they call the gig economy. And in the gig economy, the traditional Marxist labor model of workers in the factory fighting the boss, that's not going to work anymore, right? We have to focus on building government policies that invest in communities. We have to build a populist movement. The idea that we're going to, organize the workers in the factory to seize the factory, it's just not going to happen that way. That's just not the way the Western economy is moving. We're moving toward a very individualized economy, where workers are competing with each other and being creative to try and get a little bit of edge and kind of going out every day and hustling to survive. It's a disaster. It's a disaster what they've got us going for. And we have to have a government that invests in people, right? We need a government that invests in communities. We need a government that invests in individuals and their creativity. We need a government that enables people to be entrepreneurs and be creative as part of an overall central vision for the good of the entire nation, right? That's what we need to have. We need to have 5-year economic plans like they have in China. And we need a state that invests in people, not in big monopolies, not in bankers, not in mega corporations, but a state that invests in human beings and their creative power and stabilizes and plans the economy and allows human creativity to flourish within that economy. That is what we need. And, that's not what communists believe. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But we at the Center for Political Innovation, we understand all of this. This is how the world is working, and we understand it. And we're connected with Russia. We're connected with China. We're connected with Vietnam and Cuba and Venezuela and Iran and all the countries that have this new, system where, the state plans the economy and human creativity and a middle class and entrepreneurship is cultivated. We understand this. And because we understand this, we have this understanding, we don't sound like most of the left, and we certainly don't sound like the right. But we're connected with what's really happening in the world. We know why the West is in decay. We know why the East and the BRICS countries are rising. We understand this. Now, this weekend, October 18th, they had the No Kings rallies, which were a complete train wreck and disaster. And I'll talk more about that later. But all over the country, they had these rallies against Trump called No Kings, right? Trump is too authoritarian. He's centralizing too much power, blah, 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 blah. And we said, hands off Venezuela. The focus should be on opposing war against Venezuela. And in multiple cities, we intervened very effectively at these rallies. And I'm going to show you the video of CPI taking action. There are people in the chat who are in this video. Shout out to all of you. This is CPI taking action and intervening at the No Kings rallies to put forward an anti-imperialist message. No Kings. Here we go. As you know, probably, on Saturday, there was a huge mobilization by the Democrat Party against Donald Trump. It was called No Kings. And many people are commenting on the rallies, how it was largely middle-aged and elderly people, and how the rallies seemed to have no real substance other than Trump derangement syndrome. Well, we at the Center for Political Innovation, we decided to crash these rallies, to say, hands off Venezuela. If you want to protest Trump, you should be protesting the fact that he's threatening a new war right here in our hemisphere against Venezuela. And we reject largely the Trump derangement syndrome message, but we called for hands off Venezuela. Now, we went to a number of these rallies around the country and made our point, hands off Venezuela, interrupted elected officials, passed out leaflets, had some great conversations. Here is a summary of our intervention at the No Kings rallies, October 18th.
Venezuela. Keep my money here for jobs and education in America.
Instead of no kings, we should be having a rally, no wars. Maybe the one in the Middle East ended, maybe it didn't. Hopefully the one in Ukraine is about to end, but we need not to start one in Venezuela. No new Vietnam in this hemisphere. Stop the war against Maduro. Venezuela isn't pushing drugs, the CIA is. Stop Mark Rubio and the neocons from conning Trump into a new war in Venezuela.
Hands off Venezuela. I don't want our children to go to war. I don't want anybody's child to go to war. We can't afford any more war. We need hands off Venezuela. Hands off Venezuela. No war. And we gotta apply pressure where it's needed, like the neocons.
Soda in Twin Cities. Come on, buddy.
Hands off Venezuela! Hands off Venezuela!
Get you yourselves a hand. This is glorious. And I say, no kings. You say no Trump. No kings. No kings. No kings.
We say in Latin America, solo el pueblo salva al pueblo. Only the people can save the people.
We are the people that will repair, restore, and make this nation finally the place of belonging for all of us.
As we witness the pain and the violence brought upon our families.
Bring our troops home.
He's not been of immigrants and citizens alike.
Indigenous people, bring us
Violent
home.
arrests,
No war in Venezuela.
militarized victims in the name of full safety.
Well, it's disrespectful to invade another country.
When hearts are numb, the cries of
We don't want no World War III. We don't want World War III, folks. This is what we ought to be talking about. The kings are the military-industrial complex, the pharmaceutical-industrial complex, the Democrats, the Republicans, even Mamdani. He wants the young people to think Maduro is a dictator. He is not. So it's not just Marco Rubio. It's Mamdani and the Democrats too. Because at the end of the day, they make money from the lobbyist groups. We need to get money out of politics. That's what we need to do, folks. We don't need to be creating another war with Venezuela. Venezuela never attacked us. We're bombing fishing boats. Hands off Venezuela. Peace now.
We got a oligarch crisis.
So stop the war in Venezuela. You're worried about guns? Bring more troops home and stop bombing other countries. No, stop the war in Venezuela. Jobs and schools for America. You want to stop school shootings? Let's stop selling guns to Nazis in Ukraine, huh? How about that?
And what about the abuse of the criminal justice system? My dear friend and your dear friend, Tish James, is facing an indictment along with James Comey. This is an abuse of the criminal justice system. Basically, he took your Medicare and Medicaid and got rid of it so that he could give it the money to the billionaires. It is so evil, so wrong, and we can't stand it.
Hands off Maduro! Bring our troops home!
From signing Trump into war with Venezuela. That war will make Vietnam look like a picnic. Everybody in Venezuela's got a gun and they all love their president. This war will be a dumb war to get into. Any war is dumb, but this war will be really dumb. Stop Rubio's war in Venezuela. Got to concentrate on ending wars, not making wars. If the Democratic Party adopts that message, they'll win 100% of the House. But instead, they're talking about stupid stuff.
Brother, I like your sign on that. Could I ask you about it?
Yeah, sure.
All right. You are live on No Jumper, brother. What is Hands Off Venezuela? What's going on for those that don't know?
So for those who don't know, right now the U.S. is trying to destabilize Venezuela again, to trying to take its resources by claiming that the government is in cahoots with narco traffickers. While we all know that the CIA, like there's a 60-minute segment that shows that a general that was smuggling was actually a CIA asset.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's like
kind of like mirroring what happened with the Iran-Contra.
Yeah,
it sounds like El Salvador in the 80s.
Yeah, definitely. But this was in the 90s when Venezuela is still not in a socialist government.
Okay.
Yeah.
And why do I keep hearing about Israel's involvement?
The Venezuelan government has been very outspoken about the genocide that's currently going on in Gaza. So if you have a legit government calling you out by name and word, by calling it a genocide, saying that you're committing genocide out loud, I don't think you're going to like as Israel hearing that, like when having that.
They don't want to get put on blast.
Yeah, they don't want to get put on blast. You could insinuate it and be fine with it, but like they don't want to be called out for what it is, because like there's meaning, like legally there's meaning to those words, like so
okay.
There's retribution, but
at the end of the day, it's money in politics. I mean, it doesn't matter where that money is coming from necessarily. I mean, there's lobbyist groups of all kinds, and when Obama was president, the Supreme Court passed Citizens United, which put that on steroids.
Right.
Basically, it had already been in place, but now anything goes, and we're seeing the influence of AIPAC in practically every part of our government. You know what I mean? So it's like, and even Trump, I think at the Knesset even admitted, to the world that we're getting all this money from Miriam Edelson and all this. And the irony of this event here is George Soros funds a lot of the No Kings events, and he's technically, by principle, you could say he's a king.
Yeah,
a lot
literally.
of money,
like,
and he
is that the richest dude in the world, kind of?
Hi, this is Paul and Gavin from the Quad Cities branch of the Center for Political Innovation. We're here at the No Kings rally in Davenport, Iowa, and I figured this was going to be a few hundred people at the most. It actually looks like thousands of people. And so I was able to get out 100 of the Stop Trump and Rubio's War on Venezuela, I guess specifically Rubio's War on Venezuela, flyers out. Those things went like hotcakes.
He has lost the plot with this circus rally. Instead of campaigning to stop Comey and John Bolton from going to jail, they should be campaigning to throw Mark Rubio in there with them. Regime change wars are a crime. All war is a crime. Peace is the future. This summit coming up in Bucharest is the future, but a new war with Venezuela will sabotage it, and that's what Mark Rubio is pushing. Mark Rubio is the new John Bolton, and Mark Rubio needs to join John Bolton in prison. Don't defend Bolton, don't defend Comey, don't defend Clapper, don't defend Hillary, don't defend these warmongers. Oppose all wars. If you want the Democrats back in power, you have to oppose the wars. That's what people voted for, is an end to the wars. That's not what this administration actually delivered. If you show you're going to deliver it, then you'll win. But if you show that you oppose him even talking about ending the wars, then you're going to lose again. People are tired of wars. People around the world are tired of the wars. People in the United States are tired of the wars. And we don't need a new Vietnam here in our hemisphere. We need to stop this war with Venezuela. We need to fire Mark Rubio and have him be John Bolton's cellmate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think our organization did a great job. My applause and the tip of my hat to everyone represented in those videos. That was a very effective intervention. And I think that it was what needed to be done. We did our best, right? These big mobilizations happened, and we got a message out at those mobilizations. And I think we did a great job. Great job to everyone in the video. Well done. Well done. Great work, everyone. Thank you for taking action. We do appreciate it. We do appreciate it. And you made a difference, I believe. And I'm obviously sending those videos all over the world, making sure people around the world know that it happened. It was really, really important. Yeah. So what's wrong with the No Kings rallies? What's wrong with them? Well, the message is that Trump, needs to not have authority. That Trump shouldn't be going after the people who made up the Russiagate hoax, like John Bolton, like James Comey and the FBI director. The message is that Trump shouldn't be centralizing power and pushing back against the political establishment, that he should just be a puppet. And they don't want strong leadership. That's really the message of these rallies. It's even though Trump has basically done pretty much what any other president would do, because there is a whiff of populism in Trump, because Trump talked about, he didn't care who won in Ukraine as long as the killing stopped, because Trump spoke against the elites, because Trump, presents himself as a champion of the Rust Belt worker, etc. They see Trump as potentially a threat to their system. And the rally is all about defending the awful status quo from the potential that Trump might actually change things. Well, Trump isn't changing things. He's continuing the wars, he bombed Iran, etc. But that's not enough for them. Trump is just not hawkish enough. Trump is just not pro FBI enough. These rallies have completely lost the plot. The establishment wants to remove Trump because they're afraid he might make peace with Russia. The establishment wants to remove Trump because they are concerned about him exposing the Russiagate hoax. The establishment wants to remove Trump because they feel like he's not a team player for imperialism. And that's why these rallies are awful, right? We are critical of Trump. We don't support him bombing Iran. We don't support him attacking Venezuela. We don't support a lot of what he's doing, and we're disappointed in a number of ways. But these people, they are opposing Trump for the wrong reasons. They want Trump to be another Joe Biden. That's the only way they would be happy. Well, we don't want Trump to be another Joe Biden. We would like Trump to actually be a peace president. He's not doing that, but, wouldn't it be better if he did? And I want to talk specifically tonight, in the remainder of my opening remarks. I just want to talk about a couple other things. Another small trifle that I thought was worth bringing to your attention. Now, keep in mind, you can send questions for the second half of the show. Rumble Rants, Cash App, or Buy Me a Coffee. Buy Me a Coffee is the best way to send questions. So No Kings, this was the big U.S. political establishment mobilization. It was the Democrat Party basically calling out. It's MSNBC, CNN, big liberal mobilization against Trump. That's what this was. There is a small communist group that is trying to do their own version of No Kings. And they're doing it because they are a front for French intelligence. And I wanted to bring this all to your attention because this is something that I've spent a lot of time researching and all this. So on November 5th, the Revolutionary Communist Party, they have a mass organization called Refuse Fascism. And they are calling for people to come to Washington, D.C. for a whole bunch of civil disobedience because Trump must go, right? And Trump is fascist and he must go. And why are they doing this? They're doing this because they're a front for the French imperialists. The French imperialists are furious because they lost their 3 colonies, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso used to be de facto colonies of France. They were formally independent, but French companies and corporations dominated their economy. The French military was there. The United Nations was there, and these countries were impoverished. And in 2023, there was revolutions in all three of these countries. The military of Mali, of Niger, of Burkina Faso rose up, and they established the Union of Sahel States. It's a great development, a really, really great development. And Russia is what enabled it to happen. It was Russia that supported the military and brought to power the great African leader Ibrahim Traore, brought to power these new anti-colonial revolutionary governments in what was formerly French, imperialist property. And France is a huge supporter of sending weapons to Ukraine. And the French government right now is in a crisis because their ruling class is fighting among themselves. They've just jailed the former president, Nicolas Sarkozy, is now in jail, allegedly because he got money from Gaddafi. God forbid, right? That, it's like Russiagate, but Sarkozy has now been jailed for allegedly getting money from Gaddafi. The French ruling class is fighting with itself, and they very much want to drive out Trump, and they want to have an all-out war with Russia, and they are meddling in our politics here in America to try and push for a continuation of the war. And the Revolutionary Communist Party, they started out as a Maoist communist group in the United States during the 1970s, but during the 1980s, they became agents of French intelligence. And I know about this, and I have documented this, and I am going to tell that story tonight, just so we're clear on this, that when, they're coming up, they're having these big national days of action, I don't think much is going to come of it because they're doing it. But I actually wrote a whole book, a letter to their leader, Bob Avakian, a letter to Bob Avakian, where in this book, I document that they are operating as assets of French intelligence, and I document it. So basically what happened? During the 1970s, China's politics very dramatically changed. And the RCP, the Revolutionary Communist Party, was an attempt to build a new party that was aligned with China. Well, in 1976, Mao Zedong died, and there was a fight in China, and then Deng Xiaoping came to power. Bob Avakian decided he didn't like Deng Xiaoping. And so there was a big fight within the RCP, and they kicked out the people in the RCP who supported Deng Xiaoping, and they announced that China was no longer socialist, and they turned against China. And at that point, the RCP then engaged in a series of provocations against the Jimmy Carter administration because there were people within the American government who didn't want to have relations with China. The John Birch Society and a lot of Republicans didn't support the USA recognizing the Chinese government. And because of that, when the Chinese embassy opened in Washington, D.C., Bob Avakian's followers trashed it. They threw explosives into it. They broke all the windows, and they trashed and attacked the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. And when Deng Xiaoping came to the White House, they somehow penetrated White House grounds. This is a serious crime. You try to do something like this nowadays, you're going to jail for a really long time. I don't know how they did this. Most likely they did this because they were helped by deep state elements that are anti-China. But somehow 2 RCP members got into the White House. And when Jimmy Carter and Deng Xiaoping were having a press conference, they ran at Deng Xiaoping with their little red books and were jumped by security, by the Secret Service, and kicked out. But they got in and they penetrated White House grounds, very serious crime, to harass and threaten Deng Xiaoping. Hundreds of RCP members were arrested trying to prevent the USA from establishing diplomatic relations with China. Very horrible, horrible thing. And they were heavily infiltrated at the time by a nonprofit called Western Goals. Western Goals was a nonprofit set up by the John Birch Society, the Western Goals Foundation, that trained people. It was a domestic intelligence agency, a domestic intelligence service, a private intelligence service run by Congressman Larry McDonald.
And they trained people to join communist groups and manipulate them from within. And it appears that the RCP was being used by Western goals, this like CIA, John Birch Society group, to, to hurt China, because, they thought Mao, China had sold out, Deng Xiaoping had abandoned Mao's revolutionary line. And so they were being used by the Western Goals Foundation. And they engaged in very provocative acts, destroying the Chinese embassy, penetrating White House grounds to go after Deng Xiaoping. Hundreds of their members were arrested. Then they announced, after this had happened, 1979, they announced that they were going to have May Day 1980, and they called a general strike on May 1st, which they had no labor unions. So it was not a general strike, but they pretended to have a general strike on May 1st. And basically what happened was the Iran hostage crisis was happening. And Ronald Reagan and conservatives were having rallies against Iran. And the RCP would show up at these rallies and burn the American flag and become the punching bags and the rodeo clowns for the conservatives. And these conservatives would beat the hell out of them and injure them. A lot of them went to the hospital. A couple of their members died. And they were like the heels, the villains in professional wrestling at these, Iran rallies to get the pro, imperialist, Reagan right wing, like riled up, right? Really, really an awful thing. Two of their members got killed. One member was found at the bottom of an elevator shaft in New York City. Her body was found at the bottom of an elevator shaft. Another one of their members was stabbed to death in Los Angeles after he had gone to the Alamo and pulled down the American flag and put up a communist flag. And the next day he was stabbed to death in Los Angeles. And it was, the RCP was this group that was acting crazy because they were controlled by American intelligence. Bob Avakian, and the leader of the RCP, was facing very serious criminal charges. And so in 1982, he fled the country and he moved to France. And in my book, I document it. He admits that when he got to France, there was a whole network set up for communists from around the world that were fleeing to France. At this same time, Red Brigades, the Red Brigade terrorists in Italy that were bombing people during the years of lead, they all fled to France, and they were given safe refuge in France. And, who else fled to France? The Unicorn Killer, the guy who invented Earth Day, Ira Einhorn, the Unicorn Killer. He fled and he lived in hiding in France for many years. And that France had this policy of letting communists from around the world go to France, right? And that Eldridge Cleaver lived in France for a while, and that this was like a French intelligence program that they set up, that basically if you're a communist and you're facing serious criminal charges, France will take you in. We won't send you back to America. You can live in France. You can live your life in France. Now, Bob Avakian applied to be a formal political exile, like a formal political exile in France. He wanted to be an official political exile and get like asylum status. They denied it. But he stayed in France. And from 1982 to 2003, that's 20 years, Bob Avakian lived in France. And the Revolutionary Communist Party was directed from France. Bob was running it from France. And at the time, there were big divisions between French imperialism and American imperialism. For example, the French believe in nuclear power. They helped Iraq get nuclear power, and Israel bombed Iraq and killed a French scientist by bombing the Iraqi nuclear facilities. France also, because they believe in nuclear power, and they don't like environmentalist groups. And France, the French government murdered Greenpeace activists, because Greenpeace was harassing their whaling ships and Greenpeace was against nuclear power. The French government conducted, an assassination of Greenpeace activists. What year was that? France killed Greenpeace. So this is, and Greenpeace was very much, a counter gang. And in 1985, the French government saw Greenpeace as working for the British and the Americans and working against nuclear power. So the French sunk and killed the Rainbow Warrior, which was a Greenpeace ship, and they killed a couple French citizens or a couple American or I think, yeah, American citizens that were part of the Greenpeace group. So this kind of intelligence rivalry was going on. France really liked Saddam Hussein. The US government did not like Saddam Hussein, right? And so there was kind of a weird relationship where France would do business and buy oil from Saddam Hussein, and France had an economic relationship with Saddam Hussein, whereas the US government hated Saddam Hussein. And all of this was going on. So what happened later? Then in the 1990s, what was the big leftist political cause of Gen X? What was the major, if you were a communist in America in the 1990s, what was the issue that you organized around? What was the issue? What was the main cause? If like every communist group in America, what did they focus on during the 1990s? What was like the focus, the main obsession? It was on all the all the albums of Rage Against the Machine. They talked about it, and rappers talked about it. And what was the big communist cause of the 1990s? It was this guy. It was hold on, gotta put the image on the screen. The major cause of the 1990s, which I believe was a just cause. I think he's innocent. The main communist cause of the 1990s was this guy, Mumia Abu-Jamal. Now, Mumia Abu-Jamal was a former Black Panther from Philadelphia who was accused falsely of killing a police officer, and he didn't do it. He was innocent. But the government of the state of Pennsylvania wanted to give Mumia Abu-Jamal the death penalty. And the French government made it their mission to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, to stop his execution. And in 1995, they were successful, right? Hundreds of thousands of people flew into Philadelphia. They had huge demonstrations. The Pope spoke up in support of Mumia, and all kinds of people. And the execution was stopped. And it was a French intelligence operation. And it's funny because I know this because I worked with communists, and they talked about how they fundraised like crazy from France, to do it. How they went over to France and they came back with loads and loads of money to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. And I actually, while I was in Russia, I talked with somebody, I'm not going to say who, an American who was very politically active. I mean, very politically active during this time. And they confirmed to me that, oh, yeah, they knew that for a fact, that the movement to free Mumia Abu-Jamal was a French intelligence operation. And they made it pretty obvious. They named a street in Paris. There is a street in Paris named after Mumia Abu-Jamal. Various French cities have made Mumia Abu-Jamal a French citizen. And the French government lists on its website, one of its official foreign policy goals is to end the death penalty. So the French imperialists, in their rivalry with the U.S. imperialists, they like Saddam Hussein. The USA hates Saddam Hussein. The USA has the death penalty. They don't like the death penalty. They made it their mission to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Well, what a coincidence that a communist group whose leader is living in Paris, they become focused on freeing Mumia Abu-Jamal. In fact, they're the main organization dedicated to freeing Mumia Abu-Jamal. And they just happen to be directed by their leader who lives in Paris. Can they make it more obvious what's going on here, right? They're getting their orders from France, and the French government is naming streets after Mumia, and the French government is openly funding and backing activist groups to the RCP were functioning as assets of French intelligence. This was going on. But at the time, that didn't prevent the RCP from doing good work because, French imperialism was at odds with American imperialism, and Mumia Abu-Jamal was innocent. And I think, aligning with French imperialism to free Mumia, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that, right? Mumia was innocent. And, thank goodness he's still alive. But they were doing it in coordination with the French imperialists and with the French deep state that was in a rivalry with the American deep state. And then what happened? The USA invaded Iraq. Who was the main voice opposing it? The French president, Jacques Chirac. The French imperialists strongly opposed the invasion of Iraq. Well, of course,
the communists did as well. And again, was the invasion of Iraq good? No, the invasion of Iraq was wrong. So aligning with the French imperialists to build an anti-war movement to oppose the invasion of Iraq, that's a good thing, right? And it made sense, right? And because French imperialism was at odds with British and American imperialism, to be an ally, to be an asset of French intelligence, it didn't make you bad. It didn't put you on the wrong side. You could oppose the invasion of Iraq. You could support Mumia. You know, you could be on the right side of things and be an agent of French intelligence. And then what happened, right? France really hated George W. Bush. And so what happened, right? Michael Moore, he made the film Fahrenheit 9/11. Fahrenheit 9/11. And the film Fahrenheit 9/11 won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. Michael Moore was, loved. Basically, the French government-sponsored film festival gave Michael Moore the highest prize for his anti-Bush film. And Harold Pinter, he won the Nobel Prize for literature for his playwriting, his drama work. And Harold Pinter, he gave a big long speech, and then eventually they gave him the Legion d'Honneur, the highest honor in French society. He was honored for this. And again, Harold Pinter said a lot of true things, but the French hated Bush. So 2003, the French are against the Iraq War. The French have supported Mumia Abu-Jamal. What happens? Bob returns to the United States. And when he gets to the United States, he says, hey, we're going to focus on impeaching George W. Bush. And the RCP forms World Can't Wait, Drive Out the Bush Regime. And they form a protest group dedicated to impeaching George W. Bush, and that becomes their focus. The World Can't Wait. Before they had Not in Our Name, which was an anti-war group. They'd had Refuse and Resist to support Mumia. But Bob, in 2003, he returns from exile, comes back to the United States. It's not clear how he stayed in France because he was denied political exile status, but he had to have come to some kind of agreement with the French government. And he returns from exile, and they become dedicated to impeaching George W. Bush at the same time that France is promoting Michael Moore, promoting Harold Pinter. You get the picture. They're assets of French intelligence. And they don't support any existing communist government. They don't support China. They don't support Cuba. They don't support North Korea. All of them are revisionists, right? That only Bob, with his new synthesis, he's the one true communist in the world. All the others have abandoned it. Only Bob Avakian, with his new synthesis, understands communism. I mean, it's particularly ridiculous, right? Their ideology deteriorates into this weird, philosophical wrangling, solid core with a lot of elasticity. And you go to talk, you see the RCP people, ask them what Bob Avakian's new synthesis is. They can't explain it to you. They pull out books and try to start reading to you. They can't actually explain it themselves. And the group has really fallen apart. And when Bob came back in 2003, he kicked out a number of the people in the group who he didn't find to be trustworthy. And the group has really, really deteriorated. It's become kind of a joke. But now, why is the RCP not good? Right? You'd think that the RCP would support Russia and Ukraine. Why? Because of a basic principle called revolutionary defeatism. You always welcome the defeat of your own imperialist power. But Russia didn't, the RCP denounces Russia and calls Russia an evil imperialist country. You would think the RCP would support China. Maybe they don't think they're socialist anymore, but they would support them on the basis of being against U.S. imperialism. No, they call China a hellhole. And RCP is basically, they are basically taking the French position. And their position, they have this hysterical demonstration that they're planning. Their rhetoric is that Trump is so dangerous. He's got to be removed. That we're living in fascism right now. That's their rhetoric, is that we're living in fascism. Well, you're wrong. We're living in a period where there's a division within the ruling class. There's a power struggle going on, and Trump represents a faction that to some degree or other is less hawkish and is at odds with the FBI. I could not believe it, but during Trump's first term, The Revolutionary Communist Party, Refuse Fascism, which is they turned World Can't Wait into Refuse Fascism. Refuse Fascism had a rally to support James Comey, the FBI director. When Trump fired James Comey, what did they do? They had a rally to support the FBI director against the elected president. Like, they want the rule of the FBI, not elected leaders. Completely unbelievable. And the RCP are agents of French intelligence. They're assets of French intelligence. They were directed from France for many years. Their activism completely lines up with French foreign policy goals. When French imperialism and American imperialism were at odds, they did great work. Now that French imperialism is aligned with the USA and Ukraine, now not only do they demonize Russia and Ukraine, but they want to go further. They want Trump removed because he's too friendly to Russia. I mean, you can't make this shit up, right? Right now, the people of Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger have been fighting and finally achieved their independence from French imperialism. But is the RCP supporting them? No, the RCP is working with the French imperialists to try and oust Trump and escalate war against Russia as revenge for the people of the Sahel states gaining their independence. I mean, you can't make this up. The RCP is really, really deteriorated. But here's the sad thing. You remember 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade and enabled states to outlaw abortion. And when that happened, the RCP, they have been doing abortion protests for years. It's one of their favorite causes, rise up for abortion rights. And they organized some protests. And AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, spoke at one of their rallies. Good for them. I mean, if I don't think abortion should be the focus, but whatever. Whatever. And after that, mainstream U.S. media went into an overdrive attacking the RCP, calling them what? A cult, right? And the Daily Beast did hit pieces on them. The Intercept did pieces on them. They were widely demonized. Article after article came out. Planned Parenthood, the main pro-abortion group, wrote a letter saying the RCP is not welcome at our events. And they got majorly canceled. And they went after their main organizer, a woman named Sincera Taylor, who's not that much older than me. She's older than me, but not maybe by 10 years at the most. And they canceled her viciously. They called her a groomer. They smeared her reputation. I mean, they went after them viciously. Why? Because they're controlled by French intelligence. They're not controlled by American intelligence. The U.S. government doesn't trust them because there have been differences between American imperialism and French imperialism in the past. And because the RCP is an illiberal group, and because the RCP has a very disciplined way of doing things, right? They do have democratic centralism, and they're good at organizing rallies for abortion or against Trump or whatever. Even though they were saying exactly what MSNBC says, hysterical, pro-abortion, anti-Trump stuff, they smeared and canceled them. Why? The U.S. imperialists don't need Maoists. They don't need you, Bob. They don't need you to run their anti-Trump campaign. They've got MSNBC to run their anti-Trump campaign. They've got George Soros. They don't need you. And it is so tragic. It is so tragic to watch the Revolutionary Communist Party, right, that are basically agents of French intelligence, helping the French imperialists try to remove Trump so that NATO can be more war and more hostile to Russia, and get canceled for it. Yeah, they've got no kings. They don't need refuse fascism. They've got no kings. And the U.S. ruling class has said, no thanks. We don't need you. We don't. Yeah, they've got Brian Becker. They don't need. And it's sad. It's just downright fucking sad. Right? The RCP, it's like, it's a thing they talk about, simps, right? Have you ever heard of this? Like the guy who, the woman is never going to date him, but he follows her around and he buys her nice things and he cleans her apartment and he drives her places and he does all kinds of stuff for her, hoping that eventually she'll sleep with him, but she doesn't. But he thinks that she's going to sleep with him. So that's basically what the RCP have turned into. They are simps of the Democrat Party. And it's tragic. It's tragic, right? I always mess up when I use these
these these slangs. But a simp is a person, in particular a man, who is excessively attentive or submissive to someone whom they are romantically or sexually interested in. That's what the RCP have turned into. They are Democratic Party simps. And the Democrats have said, no, thank you. No, thank you. We have other boyfriends. We got Brian Becker. We've got George Soros. We've got Rachel Maddow. We really don't need you, Bob. And Bob is just convinced, no, we'll organize the anti-abortion rally. Please, please, date me. And it's like, they don't want you, Bob. They don't want you because you're a Maoist. And they think Mao is a mass murdering dictator. They don't want you because you're a Leninist. And they think that Lenin and Stalin and mass murder. They don't want you because your group is illiberal and has an authoritarian structure. And they don't want illiberal organizations. They just want hashtags. And it's so pathetic watching the RCP simp for the Democratic Party, right? They are the desperate guy who's trying to get the girl to date him, and she's not interested, but he's being a sucker, right? Simps aren't sexy, and it's really, really sad. And so on November 5th, French intelligence is going to organize their own version of No Kings. And they're already getting canceled for it. The ruling class has no kings. They don't need refuse fascism. They've got no kings. But this is Sarah Taylor defensively explaining that they are not a cult and that, you've got to join refuse fascism because they're going to drive out Trump. It's really fucking sad. This is their organizer, who's a serious organizer, who I do respect. I mean, she's a smart person, and if Bob ever kicks the bucket, she's probably going to be the leader of the RCP. She's going to be the next leader. She's going to inherit the farm. And this is her desperately urging people, please work with us, even though we're communists, even though we're canceled as a cult. Please work with us. Please, please. We can be anti-Trump liberals too. So sad.
I get the feedback a lot when I say the name of the organization. I don't want to be associated with that.
First and foremost, we tell everybody that what is at stake is the future of humanity. And the question is not, do you want to work with this?
Yeah, the future of humanity is at stake. That's why if they're able to drive out Trump, we're going to have a nuclear war with Russia. Yes, you're on the wrong side. You're helping the people. Trump is trying to some degree or other. It looks like Trump is trying to not have World War III with Russia. Humanity's fate is at stake, and you're on the wrong goddamn side.
Group or that group. The question is not, do you agree with everything that anybody else in the organization is saying? The question is, where do you stand on fascism? And the objective fact is we only defeat this by standing together, and there is only one plan and program. There is only one practical approach that has been developed that is even aiming to drive out this regime. And there's only one that corresponds to a path that could really succeed, and that's what Refuse Fascism has put forward in this call. Is there anything in this call that's untrue?
Is there anything in this call that I wouldn't hear on the Rachel Maddow show?
Ask them. This is reality. Those are the terms. All of us are answerable to this reality and to history on this. We're not answerable to what is popular, what our friends think, what the movement thinks, any of that crap. We are answerable to future generations and to the people of the world and to the immigrants in detention right now to drive this regime out. And so this is what we all have to join with. That's number one. And to do that, we have to work together. Number two, before you go getting scared because of or repeating, even worse, slander and snark against organizations, including the one that I'm part of, the RevComs, and the leader I support, Bob Avakian, have the integrity to find out what they actually stand for yourself. Because I guarantee you, the majority of people who spread this snark and slander about Bob Avakian and the RevComs have never looked into his work. They say stuff that is so counter to what his work and his life record over decades has been. People say, oh, he's an old white guy, he's a racist. This man worked with the Black Panther Party. He has been dedicated for decades to the liberation of black people as part of the emancipation of humanity. People say, oh, Bob
Yeah, you know, and they've done the same thing to me. I literally videotaped the police beating up black women in Cleveland, and they call me a white supremacist. Like, they don't want you. Stop groveling before evil motherfuckers. Like, it's embarrassing. Can't you just figure out you're on the wrong side? You know, the imperialists, they've got the whole apparatus of imperialist monopoly capital to run their campaign to remove Trump the Bonapartist, right? Yeah, they've canceled me the same way. And then I realized, oh, that's because they're on the opposite side, right? It continues.
And he's a totalitarian. He wants no rights. Read the Constitution he's written and his work on for the New Socialist Republic and the work he's done on the rights of the people and free speech and dissent and the importance of that to any just society and the work he's done under this system to defend as long as we're forced to live under this.
Avakian calls himself a Maoist, a Marxist, a Leninist, and a Maoist, and they are fighting to defend the liberal order. Sansara, they think Trump is like Lenin. They think Trump is like Mao. That's their problem. Trump is not like them. That's what they think. That's why they march through the streets with pictures of Trump and Kim Jong-il. That's why they said, oh my God, if Trump wins, we're going to leave NATO. They think Trump is like what you're for. Don't you get it? They're against what you're for. And they are against Trump because they think he's like you. Come on.
Will defend the rights of this Constitution, even that are supposed to be guaranteed, even as we're fighting for a different Constitution. People don't know thing one about Bob Avakian. They are caught up in what is too common in this culture, and it's directed against him in particular because he's extremely radical and challenging. But it's directed against others too. Cancel culture.
Yes. And who controls the cancel culture? Why is it that the Me Too movement started when Trump was elected president and it ended when Joe Biden was nominated? Cancel culture is controlled by the people you're sucking up to. Come on. Right? And they've done it to me and they will do it to anybody. They are the enemy. They are the main danger. The Democrat Party and their Atlanticist pathology that thinks Russia is the same as Hitler and all of that, they are the ones that are doing this to you. You're on the wrong side.
Snark culture. If you are on the outs and I defend you, I might get on the outs, so I better join the cool kids and not go there.
So stop trying to be one of the cool kids. That's what you're doing. You're sucking up to the people that are doing this, not just to you, but to all of us. Stop it. Just say no. Just say no.
This has got to stop. We're not going to do anything serious if we keep this going. This is what the fascists have. They've made like mincemeat out of so many movements by preying upon this. We cannot feed into their hands. So number two.
Yes, exactly. So stop supporting the liberals.
Is find out for yourself, have the integrity and principle to actually tell the truth and challenge bullshit when you hear it. You don't have to be a RevCom. You don't have to support and follow Bob Avakian like I do to call people out for spreading snark, just like we call people out for spreading snark about any other group. Differences of principle we need to get into. Differences of strategy, like should we general strike or go to D.C., we should discuss. We can learn from each other. But snark and cancel and stay away is just destructive.
Or how about we don't try to remove Trump in order to have World War III with Russia, and instead we focus on organizing for jobs and schools and education and against the low-wage police state, and we demand a government of action that fights for working families. How about that? How about we support the peace talks that Trump is doing to try and prevent World War III with Russia? How about we support Tulsi Gabbard, and exposing that Russiagate was a hoax? You're on the Russiagate side, Sansara.
It does the work of the fascists for them, and frankly, most people who spread it, who are hardcore about it, not everybody who repeats it without knowing, but most who are hardcore about it are doing it because they're afraid of answering thing one. Where do you stand on fascism?
No, they're not. They all think Trump is a fascist, and they think you're a fascist because you like Mao. They think you're a fascist because you don't have a transgender flag hanging in your window. No, they don't. They all think exactly the same shit that you do, that Trump is Hitler and we're all going to die. They just think that because your group is illiberal and your group at various points in the past has been anti-imperialist, that you're a fascist too.
And that's why you should stop sucking up to these people.
Truth, it's an avoidance. So the final thing 3, is we should tell people, look, it would be better if you had the principle and the integrity to take up November 5th and this move to drive out the fascist regime together in coalition.
Why not? We already had October 18th. And what you're saying is not any different than October 18th. Like, who cares, right? You know, they don't need you, right? They don't need you. They've got George Soros. They've got Brian Becker, right? They don't need you.
With Refuse Fascism and other organizations, it'd be better if you had the principle to do that. But if you don't want to do it with us, do it on your own. Because we have to all get to D.C.
They're already doing it on their own, and they don't need you.
This is about our responsibility to the people of the world. This is not about us. This is not about you. This is not about them. This is about which direction history will unfold in. And right now, the fascists are on a tear. It is a juggernaut. It is almost too late, and we are running out of time. So get there. Get everybody you.
Oh, so sad. So sad. You know, so sad. And it's just like, come on. Do you not see that, you know, the people of the Sahel states just got their independence from French imperialism? Do you not see that they hate Trump because he wants to make peace with Russia? They hate Trump because he's not worse. They don't want Trump to be better. They want Trump to be worse. And here's another video they made. You know, this is another video from their YouTube channel, desperately assuring everyone that they are not a cult. We're not a cult. Oh, boy.
Protest against Trump this past weekend, and there are people passing this out. This little explainer about Refuse Fascism that is designed to scare you away from them and their association with the Revcoms, Revolutionary Communists.
So why are you sucking up to them then? If they're literally passing out tracts calling you an evil cult, why are you sucking up to them?
This tiny thing is packed to the brim with lies, and I'm gonna get to them in a second. But just think about it.
Yeah, and I know who probably put it out too. And it's the same people that put out shit about me, right? And it's the same people that have targeted the Unification Church for years. It's the same people that are going after the Church of Scientology. And not everyone they go after is good or bad, but it's coming from your side. It's the, you know, their mastermind, Steve Hassan, literally wrote the book, The Cult of Trump, right? This is coming from your side.
We are in Los Angeles, ground zero of Trump's terroristic assault on immigrants. Fascism is full speed ahead in every realm of society. And what we need to be doing is acting urgently, uniting everyone possible to drive this fascist regime from power. Yet, some people thought the most important thing to do at this protest was to attack Refuse Fascism.
Because they think you're the same as Trump. Because you're an illiberal organization. Because you are Maoists, because your organization at least professes anti-imperialism, even though you don't practice it. They hate you for the same reason they hate Trump, and you're not going to be able to be the leaders of some anti-Trump movement. They don't need you.
Who since 2016 has been consistently calling this fascism out for what it is and clearly saying that the whole regime must go now.
Rachel Maddow says that every night on MSNBC. There is literally nothing original or revolutionary or exciting about calling Trump Hitler. That is like the most cliched thing ever, right? It is literally, it is practically the CNN party line. So you're so amazing because you said what MSNBC says, not following you. You know, they pay Rachel Maddow $30 million a year to say exactly what you're saying. No, you don't get special credit because you've been calling Trump Hitler. That's really pretty cheap.
Whatever those making these attacks think they're doing, what they're objectively doing is the dirty work that serves the Trump fascist regime. And Bob Avakian, a revolutionary leader, puts it in his message Revolution 129 like this.
Irresponsible opportunist distortions should not be allowed to sabotage the unity of the millions needed to drive out the Trump fascist regime.
But let's get back to this. First, on the title. On Refuse Fascism, aka Revcom. No, not aka. It's two separate organizations. And yeah, the Revcoms are very open about being part of starting it and our participation in it, alongside Democrats, independents, religious leaders, and others. Because believe it or not, we really do want to stop fascism. And if you also want to stop it, then you should unite.
Yes, it's a popular front. It's a mass campaign. Yes, we get it, right? We get it. But you know, just like other mass campaigns, it's a mass organizing effort directed by your party, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Alongside us. Oh, and by the way, Bob Avakian has been sounding the alarm about the rise of fascism in the U.S. for over 30 years.
Longer than that, actually. When Richard Nixon was president, Bob Avakian's people that at that point were called what were they called? They were called the Revolutionary Union. They called Nixon a fascist, and they had a campaign to throw the bum out. And in the 1980s, they called Ronald Reagan a fascist, and they had a campaign against Ronald Reagan. And this hustle that they've been running, where whoever the Republican president is, they call them a fascist, and they buy ads in the New York Times, and they have hysterical protests and demonstrations. Oh my God, we're all going to die. The RCP has literally been running this hustle since before either of us were born, my dear. And it's old, and it's lame, and it's not original, and it's boring, and it's not innovative.
We'd be in a way better position today if people had been seriously listening to what he's been saying versus all this anti-communist snark and dismissal. Some people in Refuse Fascism discuss Bob Avakian's work as well as analysis from a host of others. But ooh, beware, there's scary commies involved. Another outright and frankly dangerous lie.
You know, she's right. I have been targeted in the exact same way they've been targeted, but I've been smart enough to realize what side this is coming from.
Includes calling the RevComs a pyramid scheme, and twice accuses RevComs of misappropriating funds, which is not only completely made up, it's a tactic commonly used by the right-wing fascist forces in this country and the political police.
Yeah, it's part of Khrushchevism, right? You know, the leader is living in a palace and living in luxury, exploiting you all. They tried to say that shit about me too. It's like literally I spent so much of my own money on CPI, right? I'm worried about money the whole time, but according to the Cult Awareness Network narrative about me, I live in luxury at the expense of all the people in CPI. Like literally, we don't have enough dues money to pay for any of the shit that we do, right? I spend my time going around fundraising and spending my own money on making things happen. And yeah, you know, I've been subjected, I've been smeared in the exact same way. It's like, it's a playbook, right? This is the playbook that Steve Hassan and all of them use. They use it against every group. They use it against every single group, right?
Finding yourself in their company is not a good look. The flyer paints the RevComs as homophobic. Total bullshit. Our points of attention for the revolution state, we fight for a world where all the chains are broken. Women, men, and differently gendered people are equals and comrades.
Yeah, well, you didn't always think that. Okay, let's just be honest, right? This is where, like, come on, like, just be honest, okay? In the 70s and 80s and even up into the 90s, they thought homosexuality was bourgeois decadence, and they changed their minds about that. But you know, just be honest, you know, just say we used to think some stuff, we don't think that. You don't have to play games here. And there are legitimate concerns about, you know, transgender bathrooms and, you know, men and women's sports and all of that. And why aren't you allowed? Why would you join a movement that says you're not allowed to raise those concerns? You're so desperate to be included in a movement that says if you so much as say, geez, I don't know about, you know, biological males in women's sports, then you get called a Nazi. Why are you so desperate to join a movement full of people like that?
Tolerate physically or verbally abusing women or treating them as sexual objects, nor do we tolerate insults or jokes about people's gender or sexual orientation. And we RevComs take the...
She kind of talks like she doesn't tolerate jokes about anything, to be honest. I mean, the tone she's using there, I would be a little bit nervous to make a joke, you know, just a knock-knock joke around her. So I definitely would not make any jokes about women or anything like that around her. Good night. Good night.
This and all the points of attention very seriously and hold each other accountable to them. And anyone could go to our website any day of the week where we consistently expose the fascist attacks on LGBT people. They also...
And yet... the same movement that you're constantly sucking up to has made a special pamphlet all about how evil you are. You know, like, again, stop simping. Stop simping.
Tried to sell you a crude distortion, saying Bob Avakian is an authoritarian and that RevComs discourage any questioning of his authority.
Well, I mean, what if he is an authoritarian, right? I mean, China under Mao was pretty authoritarian.
You know, Soviet Union under Lenin, Stalin was pretty authoritarian. And maybe this anti-authoritarianism thing, this liberal brainworm about, oh my God, we can't have a leader and no kings and all of that. Maybe that's part of the liberal order and the problem with it. Have you ever thought about that? But no, you're not authoritarian. So you're going to try to tell a bunch of liberals, hey, I love Mao, I love Stalin, but I'm totally, totally not authoritarian. Like, just don't believe what you read. I mean, come on. Take that on. Challenge it. Ugh.
Oh, but if they say it, it must be true, right? Wrong. How much do you even want to bet that the spreaders of this have not even gone seriously into Bob Avakian's work on this question?
Well, honestly, they're being more honest about your history than you are, okay? And I hate to defend these smear artists because they've targeted me in the exact same way. But I'm telling you that you know, like you need to you can't just pander, right? You need to just be honest about who you are and fight back. And you need to stop sucking up to these people, right? They don't want you.
Have they read the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America? Probably not. If they did, they'd see it's the furthest thing from the scary authoritarian nightmare that they warn you about. And this new Constitution puts a premium on political and cultural ferment and the protection and provision for dissent. And as far as questioning him, Bob Avakian is the first person to say you should always ask why, and promotes the need to be a critical thinker and for there to be many people taking responsibility for leading the process of making revolution forward.
Hey, RCP, just a suggestion. You don't care what I think, but if you don't want people to think you're a cult, maybe don't have your leaders' writings organized into verses like the Bible. You know, just a mild suggestion there. I mean, we all know like John 3:16 and Galatians 12 and all of that. Don't have Bob Avakian 4:14. All right, that's just a little bit of advice, right? If you're really concerned, you're really desperate to make sure people don't think you're a cult, I would suggest not putting your leaders' writings up like Bible verses. Okay, that's just my thinking. Continue.
Of making revolution forward. But if they were really concerned about authoritarianism, they would stop sabotaging the movement trying to defeat this fascism. But these are just some of the particular lies in this flyer. But there's a bigger problem with the way they present all of this, and they try to get skeptical readers to go along with it. They say, why trust this? Don't believe us. Believe this list of other sources. But here's the problem. These other sources are doing the same thing that they're doing, spreading anti-communist lies, distortions, and slander.
And most of the sources are also pushing Trump derangement syndrome and pushing the same stuff that you guys push about Trump and about American politics, right? So, like, these are other people that have your exact same message that are also smearing you because you work for French intelligence and they don't need you and they kind of find you threatening.
Much of which has already been well refuted, by the way. It's like a hall of mirrors at a carnival. Lies are bouncing back and forth over and over and over. Look, something is not true because a lot of people say, or because it comes from a source that you like. The test of truth needs to be reality itself. And one of the spookiest lies that these opportunists perpetuate is the Revcoms are a cult. The Revcoms are a cult. And what's their evidence? Well, everyone says. Here, you can hear an echo of Trump in the insistence that a lot of people believe, a lot of people say that we Revcoms are a cult. Come on.
Actually, the Cult Awareness Network guy, Steve Hassan, literally wrote a book called The Cult of Trump. So you're a little confused there, my dear.
Does it actually need explaining that a lot of people believe, a lot of people say is not a good and valid standard for determining what is actually true? Okay.
Yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. And I've been subjected to the same thing. People say, well, everyone knows he's bad. Really? How do they know I'm bad? Well, and I mean, they do the exact same thing to me. And it's like I'm torn between sympathizing with them because I have been targeted in the exact same way, smeared and harassed. And our organization, CPI, has been targeted in the exact same way. So I'm with you, except I'm telling you, stop simping. Stop sucking up to these people. Join the side that is fighting against these evil motherfuckers who smear organizations like this.
But why do so many people fall for this?
Because it's coming from the side you're pandering to. That's why.
Because there's a fucked up culture, even among the left.
specifically among the left, my dear. And we got to get out of the movement and get to the masses because the movement is toxic.
An eager indulgence in snark, gossip, slander, accusation, and cancellation, whether the accusation is fabricated or true, something that is effectively irrelevant to those caught up in this. A culture that is defined by a preference for the subjective and superficial, as opposed to substance and a serious, scientifically grounded engagement with important objective reality in order to come to a reasoned, evidence-based understanding of what is actually true and what must be done to bring about positive change.
In short, way too many people are looking for gossip, not evidence. So I want to introduce a new phrase. Don't go for the tea, go for reality.
I'm sorry. I don't want to do that bread tube thing where you just show people and laugh. I really don't want to do that. I just, oh boy, don't go for the tea. Go for reality.
So what's really going on with these haters? The fact is that they are actually big mad that the Revcoms are serious about making a real revolution. There's actually a part in here where they seem to forget why they wrote this flyer in the first place. They say, instead of working alongside other activists or building broad coalitions, wait, didn't you publish this little hit piece because we are in coalition with many others from different perspectives in Refuse Fascism? So which is it? Do we work with other people or not? I digress. But they continue with actually one of the few points of content in this flyer. They cried that, oh, the Revcoms believe they alone have the correct path to revolution and everyone must follow their leader, Avakian. So let's have a debate then about...
Exactly. That's actually a really good point, right? You know, of course they think that. And if you don't think that, have a debate about it. Like, what's wrong with that, right? And that, again, it's the Khrushchevism. Yeah, they think they're right. Should they think they're wrong? You know, and this is how this Khrushchevism stuff works, right? You know, the attack against me. He speaks persuasively. Oh, shit, I'm going to try to speak non-persuasively to make sure. You know, it's this weird thing they do of like, well, they think that they are right. Good. Wouldn't it be fucked up if they were going around doing what they did and advocating their views and they didn't think they were right? Like, you know, this is how this like liberal mind fuck works.
Versus reform. That's something everyone can learn from. And yeah, we do have a real strategy for revolution. Do you have a critique of it?
Yeah, it's tail the liberals and do whatever the liberals are doing and do it louder. And whatever Rachel Maddow says, say it more louder and more hysterically. That's your strategy for revolution. I'm not impressed. Not impressed.
We'd love to hear it, but no, they're just pissed that...
Well, talk to me anytime. Any RCP person is welcome to come on this YouTube channel anytime. Just throwing that out there. Anytime, any RCP person or RCP sympathizing person is 100% welcome to come on here and we can argue about Bob Avakian and we can talk about Trump derangement syndrome or anytime. If you want to have a debate, I'm all for it. And I will not accuse you of being a cult.
We're serious about this. So you should ask these opportunists what's their strategy to overthrow this system and bring a better world into being, if that's even something that they are about. Maybe the real problem is they don't even care. Think about it. If you're a radical critic within this system of oppression and exploitation, you can carve out a certain niche for yourself. Then here are the Revcoms serious about overthrowing that system. And it challenges your position, and it also exposes their raggedy asses for not all that radical. So yeah, they are scared of having this debate. Haters like this are not trying to have this conversation, so they divert, wreck, sabotage the unity that's needed, and at this moment with so much on the line, no one should have any tolerance for it, and we all need to be vigilant to call it out when we see it. If you want to be part of a historic and urgently needed fight to actually defeat fascism, look into Refuse Fascism. Join.
Wah, wah, wah. All right. Well, anyhow, I feel like I should put on the video of when we got targeted by these people and how we handled it. And we have a very different approach to handling these people. We just make fun of them. We just make fun of them when we keep doing what we're doing. And these people, they protested our event. The very same people, the cult awareness
people, the woke, liberal, anti-cults, whatever they're called, they went after our event, and this was how we handled it. And, my hat goes off to Gabby and Penny and Peter and everyone who was there with us. And this is how we handled the Cult Awareness Network and these same people with the same kind of flyers and everything. We went out to Minneapolis to do just kind of a routine, small workshop that we do in a number of cities. We've done them before, where we get together, have some classes, get to know different members, different friends. Anyhow, we get out there and we see all these crazy signs posted up all over the neighborhood. Let's not alert the membership as of yet, right? Because they want a reaction. If they see they're getting a reaction, that'll embolden them, right? We'll just be extra careful with security at the door. But honestly, I don't think we should not do the event. No, I think we should do it. I guess we'll just proceed with our meeting as usual. Okay, so the first thing is that the break time is the most important, right? The break time when we're actually talking to people is the most important time, right? Actually, when I'm speaking and all that, it's not that important. What's important is when we're talking with the people. On Saturday morning, our main concern was the lack of heat. The Airbnb had not turned the heat on, and it was record low temperatures. It was a very, very cold night, so we're inside the house, and we're figuring we can't really start the workshop until the heat comes on. So then we see them outside.
Burger King! Burger King! Burger King! Burger King! Burger King!
It is 8:30 in the morning.
And it's like 20 below zero.
You're gonna wake up the whole neighborhood.
Yeah.
Everyone's in the neighborhood's gonna hate them.
The house across the street looks abandoned or dilapidated. I don't think they're worried about fascism. They're worried about putting food on the table.
We're worried about getting the heat turned on.
Yes,
It's a little cold here. The heat hasn't been turned on in our Airbnb.
And these guys start preemptively gloating that nobody is showing up.
No, we expected you turning the attendees away. This is amazing. It seems like no one is coming. Wow.
Not knowing that we literally don't have heat, and we're not gonna start the thing without heat. It was actually like a solid hour after they left before we got the heat, and then we had people start coming. Well, actually, I take that back. There was one gentleman they did get to try to intimidate out of attending, a disabled gentleman, which, that's cool.
They shouted at him, "Don't go in there, they'll rape you."
He attended, though. He was not scared of them.
Hello, Gabby.
I've seen you. I've seen you on the
Can we see
video.
what they gave you?
Hello.
Can we see what they gave you?
Morning. This is a cult. Press TV. Oh wow, it's Dugan.
Press TV.
Oh man, Linda LaRouche, and your name's on here too.
Really?
Yeah.
What? Famous.
Right? You're a failed political candidate and dedicated follower of Caleb Maupin's.
We're inside and laughing about it. The whole thing just looked completely insane. At 8:30 in the morning, in record cold temperatures, you have 15 kids out there wearing COVID masks with signs about spanking and fascism and cults. I mean, the whole thing just had to look completely insane.
What are they saying?
Maupin runs the CPI. He's a weird little guy.
One of the chants that they had, which I absolutely loved, was Caleb owns CPI. He's a weird little guy.
Caleb runs the CPI. He's a weird little guy.
They're calling you weird, dancing around with signs that no one understands.
Now, I thought that was very funny.
And by the way, don't you find some of their stuff to just be plain weird?
At one point, Peter Coffin walked out among the protesters. I immediately thought of the scene in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy wakes up and she's walking among the munchkins.
Come out, wherever you are.
Because they were all really short in comparison to him. And it made me think that the guy on the bullhorn or one of the people that had thought of that chant, they must have been called a weird little guy at some point in their life.
You're so out of touch. You think CPUSA would be a viable force to put together a picket like this? It's amazing.
They were on the bullhorn talking about communist inside baseball.
Colt, I mean, you started in the RCP, so it's used to Colt.
Gospels were a joke even to Trots.
No, we're trying to show you we care enough to tell you guys what's going on here. We want you guys to get out of the cult. We're trying to show you we care enough
No, we're trying to show you we care enough to tell you guys what's going on here. We want you guys to get out of the cult.
We are going to have some fun with them, but we don't want to be too mean to them, because there's a lot of people in this organization around the country, and I'm not going to violate anyone's private business, but more than a handful of people that have joined CPI, they've told me why they joined CPI. And they said, Caleb, I was in these communist circles, I was in my 20s, and I was using drugs. I rock bottomed. I screwed up, I did something wrong, and, I had to go into recovery. And I realized that if I was going to get over my addiction, I couldn't keep thinking in the pessimistic, dark, hopeless way that seems to accompany communist politics in America. I had to be optimistic. And I suddenly started hearing you, and you were the only communist I could stand to listen to anymore. You were the only one that was putting out a hopeful, optimistic message that wasn't tearing people down, that wasn't preaching resentment. I believe there were people out there that are in that same category. Do you know what I honestly believe deep in my soul? I believe that there were people out there today that will eventually join CPI. Let me just put it this way. You can never say that the Center for Political Innovation or myself or Peter, you can never say that we're irrelevant. The fact that we had a small meetup was so important to some people that they woke up on Saturday morning, went out in freezing cold temperatures, and made a huge ruckus to tell everyone just how upset they were about the fact that we exist and we continue to do our work. We were ready to defend ourselves, but they weren't a threat to us at all. They were kind of embarrassing, and they were kind of clowns. And I'm embarrassed for whatever organization let this happen, was involved in making it happen. And I'm also embarrassed for the people that did this protest, because you were out there making fools out of yourselves while we were inside talking about the serious issues and how to change the future of our country, how to fight against imperialism, globalism, how to fight for working families. So yeah, certainly an interesting trip to Minneapolis. I'm glad we were there, and we're going to do a lot more workshops, let me put it that way.
Yep, that's us, CPI. All right, folks, let's do the roll call. I'll call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, then we'll answer people's questions. Questions can be sent 3 different ways. Rumble, Cash App, Caleb Maupin 22. But the best way to send questions is to buy me a coffee. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I'll call you all out as I see you, and then I'll start answering questions. We got John McCarthy in Chicago. Joshua Tree Kinkle. St. David's, Bermuda. Names and locations. Ryan in Kansas City. Here I come. Charles in Brooklyn. Good to see you, sir. Charles in Brooklyn. Names and locations. Yusuf in Durham, North Carolina. Bendigo, Australia. The great David Fox. Talked about you last night when I talked about Australia. Yusuf in Durham. John in Florida. Alex in Brazil. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. David in San Jose, California. Good to have you with us. Good to see you. How you doing? Wouldn't be prudent. Patrick in Maine. Apache in Yemen. Penny in Minnesota. There we go. Briggy in Pennsylvania. Good to see you as always. Ian Chester in England. Good to see you. Names and locations. Kieran Pine in London. That's a lovely name. Names and locations. Gabby in Chicago. Great job on the bullhorn, as always. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. As I said before, there are 3 ways to send your questions. The best way is to buy me a coffee. You can also do Rumble Rants. You can also Cash at me at Caleb Maupin 22. But send your questions, because now I'm going to start answering people's questions. Hooray! All right. I have to provide my own sound effects because you all are on the other side of the camera and not in this room with me. So if I applaud for myself, it's not because I have an ego. Just kidding. Kate Johnson says, I am Gen X. My older brother is a young boomer. I feel like his entire worldview came from Ayn Rand. We are polar opposites. How did she influence capitalism? Objectivism, what is it? Okay, so Ayn Rand was a Jewish woman who was living in Russia at the time of the Russian Revolution. Her father was a chemist, and she was quite wealthy. Jews didn't have it very good in Tsarist Russia. Generally, they were segregated, had their own villages, were persecuted. Not her family. Her father was a wealthy chemist, and they lived in a mansion. They lived pretty well. The Russian Revolution came along, and the country was in the middle of a war, and they forced her to, share her house with other people because it was military conditions. People were moving around. This is wars in which hundreds of thousands of people died. The Russian Civil War. The Bolsheviks, they forced her family to let other people live in their mansion because they were in the middle of a war. She felt very hurt because her father, who she looked up to, was humiliated by the military, right? They forced him at gunpoint, basically, to house these other people. And she was traumatized by that from childhood. And, I'm not saying that means the Bolsheviks were bad, but, any child, right? Seeing their father forced at gunpoint to do something he doesn't want to do. If you worshiped your father was this successful rich man, and you see him, being forced by the government to do something, to let people you don't know into your home or whatever, you can understand how that would be a traumatizing experience. You have to also understand hundreds of thousands of people died in the Russian Civil War, and it was a freezing winter, and there was food shortages, and that they were doing everything. It was called war communism, military communism. But she was very traumatized by seeing her father degraded that way, as a child. And so, she went to study film, and it was the Soviet government that gave her free college education. And she went, and the Soviet Union was making some of the best movies at the time. Sergei Eisenstein was one of the greatest filmmakers in the world. Even though the Soviet Union was poor and all of that, they made a movie called The Battleship Potemkin that was seen all over the world. And the Soviet Union was like a center of the film industry in the 1920s. And she got to study with some of the greatest filmmakers. And she studied cinematography, and she got a free college education from the Soviet government. And then she lied to get her visa, and she moved to the United States. And the understanding was that she was going to go to Hollywood and learn more about filmmaking and come back to the Soviet Union to make films. Well, she lied. She just fled the Soviet Union, and she lived in Chicago with her family. And her family noticed that she was not well. She was, again, this is trauma. We'll do this to anybody. But when she got to Chicago, there was a guy, I believe his name was Hickman, was his name. What was his name? I think his name was Hickman. Yeah, William Hickman. There was a guy who in Chicago who found out that his wife had been cheating on him and strangled her to death, and he got the death penalty for it. In Chicago, and Ayn Rand fell in love with him, and she became a groupie for this wife murderer. She just was really turned on by the guy because he murdered his wife, and because he wouldn't apologize. They offered to give the guy life in prison and not give him the death penalty if he would apologize. And he said, no, I was right to kill my wife because that bitch cheated on me. And so the guy got hung and got the death penalty. And Ayn Rand got pictures of him from the newspaper and put them up. And she was sexually turned on and just had she was fixated on this wife strangler. So that's, not well. She wasn't well. She moved to Hollywood, because she wanted to work in movies, right? That was her thing. And when she was in Hollywood, she really hated the Communist Party because of, she was from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had traumatized her dad and all of that. So she hated the Communist Party, and communism was very popular in Hollywood at the time. And she was of Jewish descent. And so she became a Zionist. And she became a Nazi-aligned Zionist. Now, you don't hear a lot about this, right? You think, how could Nazis and Zionists work together? Well, look up Irgun, right? Look up the Revisionist Party. There was a faction among Zionists called Irgun who thought that the Nazis were good because they would make all the Jews have to move to Israel. And she became a fascist sympathizing, um, you know, fascist sympathizing, Zionist. She became an Irgun supporter. She says the first political cause she ever donated to was Zionism, huge supporter of Israel, and she hated the Communist Party. And she actually put up posters. She made her own poster urging people who were against Roosevelt to form some kind of movement. It was called To All Innocent Fifth Columnists, and she was sympathetic with fascism. And interestingly, in that poster that she wrote, To All Innocent Fifth Columnists, she actually condemned capitalism because she was a fascist, right? At the time, right-wing people weren't worshiping capitalism the way they do now. Back then, right-wing people said, well, we're against capitalism too, but we want National Socialism. We want the Christian Republic, the Christian Commonwealth. It was common for fascists to oppose capitalism. So Ayn Rand, back in the day, when she was a Zionist fascist, she also opposed capitalism. World War II happened. After World War II, the Communist Party is being purged out of Hollywood. The House Un-American Activities Committee goes into full swing. She becomes a friendly witness before the House Un-American Activities Committee. And she testifies up and down against all the screenwriters. They're communists, they're traitors. She becomes kind of a celebrity. And she wrote a couple novels prior to World War II. They didn't get a lot of circulation. She wrote a novel called The Fountainhead. And it's about an architect who designs buildings in a very non-conforming way, and because of that, he gets impoverished and he doesn't get a job, and he eventually blows up the building. That then they build his building wrong, and it's about he's a heroic nonconformist, and it ends with him on trial, and he gives a speech and he says, once there was a man who made fire, and he was probably burned to death by his own invention. And, it was, about this non-conforming great individual who was persecuted for being non-conforming. And the book has a particularly abhorrent scene in it, but it kind of fits Ayn Rand. The more you learn about her, there's a scene in the book where this architect who's, he has to work in a salt mine, because no one will take his buildings because they're so non-conforming and original or whatever. And so he was working in a salt mine, and there's a beautiful woman who lives near the salt mine. And she rides her horse by the salt mine, and, the guy sees her or whatever. And then the guy breaks into her apartment and violently rapes the woman. And it's portrayed in Ayn Rand's narration as heroic and a good thing. Right? It's rather disturbing. Ayn Rand had issues. But anyway, she wrote The Fountainhead about this great non-conforming man, this heroic architect rapist, basically, Howard Rourke. After World War II, she becomes very famous because she's testifying against communists before the House Un-American Activities Committee. And at the time, the American government was experimenting with different kinds of anti-communism, right? The standard anti-communism, the main anti-communism from McCarthyism was Catholic, right? It was the Catholic Church said communism is atheistic, it's against God, it's satanic, right? And that's what Joe McCarthy believed, and it was the Catholic trade union federations that were pushing the communists out of labor unions and stuff like that. That was the main thrust, right? But Ayn Rand was an atheist. She didn't believe in God. And she was, very useful to the House Un-American Activities Committee. And so they blew her up into something. They kind of made her famous, right? And she emerged, and she developed a system of thought that she called objectivism, where she basically argued that altruism is the greatest evil. Right? That when people care about other people, that's how evil exists, and that people should be purely self-interested and selfish, and they shouldn't care about other people. And she said that capitalism has never existed. It's an unknown ideal. She wrote a book that's over 1,000 pages long called Atlas Shrugged. And her writing style, it's interesting. It's very much, she tried to use the style of socialist realism. Socialist realism, which was the Soviet state propaganda style. She tried to write socialist realism against socialism. And a lot of what she did, it's this whole thing that I talk about in a lot of my work. It's like, in response to communism, they come up with their own communism, right? So communists have dialectical materialism. And what is one of the principles or the ways of expressing dialectical materialism? It's A does not equal A, right? And that's in dialectics of nature. And it's that the first A can never be the same as the second A because the world is constantly changing. Well, Ayn Rand, her philosophy of objectivism, she said A always equals A, and that all that exists is reality, and blah, 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 right? Now, one thing that annoys me is that I have said on these streams, A does not equal A many times. And there are these fucking bread tube people who have no idea that Engels said that, and that's a Marxist phrase. And there's this, he just says that because Ayn Rand says A equals A. No, I don't. Engels said it first. And it's like people know the Ayn Rand shit and they don't know that Ayn Rand was parodying communism, right? A does not equal A came first. And then Ayn Rand came up with A equals A, which is her objectivist thing. And so, yeah, she wrote novels. She put on seminars. She was just this right-wing intellectual. But I guess right-wing isn't exactly right. She was a libertarian intellectual. She considered herself a conservative. She was anti-LGBT. She was pro-Israel. She was pro-regime change wars against communism. She supported the military draft. She wasn't exactly libertarian, but her philosophy was not, it rejected any form of collectivism, right? It was the individual above all else, which is not classically conservative. It's much more individualist. And she, I don't know. I mean, she was just a fixture of American politics in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. She died, and they push her really hard in business school, right? And that conservatives read it and think they're really smart, right? And it seems really smart. If you've never read Marxism, if you've never read philosophy, if you've never read any of that stuff, if all you've ever done is, watch action movies and the football game, when someone throws, Atlas Shrugged at you, or Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, or The Virtue of Selfishness, you're like, whoa, it's so profound. That's one thing, with all due respect to libertarians, one thing that drove me crazy about libertarians is, I'm actually interested in politics, and I read conservative stuff, I read communist stuff, I've done a huge amount of investigation, but these kind of like business school normie bros have no idea that there's anything beyond that. And then they read one libertarian book. They take Econ 101 and they learn about supply and demand. And they're like, oh, I know everything there is to know. And they speak in this condescending way and they don't know shit. Right. And it's really, really annoying. And I mean, maybe this doesn't happen anymore. It happened when I was in college, right? Overnight, as soon as Obama took office, half the Republicans at my college suddenly were libertarians. They weren't Republicans anymore. I mean, they voted for Republicans. They took Republican positions on everything. They were libertarians. And they were all reading this shit. They were all reading Atlas Shrugged, right? And they would walk around like, oh, the market is, and they wouldn't know what they were talking about. They had never heard the term dialectical materialism. They didn't know any of this, but they just read, A does not A equals A, man, and oh wow, and capitalism has never been achieved before. We don't have capitalism; it's never existed before. And America is the richest country in the world because we have capitalism, but that's because we don't have real capitalism. I mean, it's just, and it's inconsistent. I don't know. And this is a general critique of anyone who starts pushing libertarian economics. It's dumb, right? First of all, America is the richest country in the world because it's capitalism. But if you point to any problems America has, well, we don't have real capitalism. We're actually socialist because we have a post office. Sometimes socialism is the post office in America. Sometimes socialism is Vietnam. China is a very wealthy country, so it's clearly because they're capitalist. Duh. Oh, China is brutally repressing people. It's because they're communists. That's what communists do. I mean, they just play this game where bad equals communist, good equals capitalist, and our definition constantly moves around that's the only consistent thing. Capitalism equals good, communism and socialism equals whatever we think is bad. Obama's a communist, Obamacare is communist, Hitler is communist. I don't know how that works. Hitler is communist. Republicans are communist. Bush was a communist. And it's obnoxious. It's really, really obnoxious. But again, if you've never read politics, if you've never actually investigated politics beyond standard Fox News, cable news discourse, if you've never read ideology before, it sounds really profound. And so it's this thing that, these young, at least when I was in college, these young people that had never questioned anything, they supported the war in Iraq, they supported the torture. Suddenly they're free thinking now. They're libertarians, and oh my God, America is a communist country. And I will say my most frustrating thing about all of this was that that the left had no answer to these people. I was saying, look, on my campus, all this stuff is really popular. We need to debunk this. No, we can't do that. No. We're just going to build the movement. If we build the movement, people will join the movement, right? And I wrote a pamphlet against Ayn Rand when I was in college, and they wouldn't let me distribute it. No, we don't need that. If we needed you writing stuff like that, you'd be in New York writing that stuff, Caleb. We just need to build the movement. We just need to build our anti-war rallies. And, these people will come to the anti-war rallies, and they'll see that the communists are leading the anti-war rallies, and they'll join us. No, we don't want to refute Ayn Rand. We don't want to have facts about the Soviet Union and stuff like that. No. Just build the movement. So it's really, I'm really mad at the communists, right? The communists had no response to any of this stuff. I mean, none. It was just build the movement, man, build the movement. So, all this stuff became very, very popular, and it is very popular, and it's very easy to debunk if you do the research, but that would require, knowing facts and reading books. And you saw the video of the PSL woman, right? That's racist. That's like white guy shit. We don't need facts. We just need our feelings, right? And we just need to be feeling that Trump is racist. That's the argument the communists should make. Trump is racist. I feel this way. Shut up, white man. And it's just, this is why the left sucks, right? The left is like the best friend these people ever had, honestly. I actually was angry to see Ayn Rand and all that shit being distributed, and I wanted to refute it, and the communists wouldn't let me because all we have to do is build the movement. We just got to build the movement. Well, now we've got a movement, and it's on the wrong side in Ukraine. It's on the wrong side in Venezuela. It's on the wrong side against the FBI. Great work. Just build the movement, man. Just build the movement. So I don't know. I get frustrated because I take this seriously. I do. I really do take this seriously. I read Ayn Rand books when I was in college because I believed in communism and because this was a very anti-communist thing that was being very widely pushed. So I read it and I wanted to argue against it because I take this seriously, right? And now I have broken with the left and that we're out of the movement to the masses because I take this seriously. I take this seriously, right? And most of these people don't. They're just on autopilot. Build the movement, man. Build the movement, man. Well, Trump is Hitler. Everybody knows that, right? And I mean, Ayn Rand's a decent writer. And honestly, as I've gotten older, I understand Ayn Rand a bit more. I don't agree with it, but it points to the fact that there is an element of, there are some people that are very, very driven in this life, right? Myself being one of them. There's probably many people in the chat that are like this. We're very driven. We want to get shit done. We want to organize things. We want to write books. We want to, we want to start our own business. We want to do things. And most people aren't like that. Most people are not driven, but there are some of us that are very driven. And that the so-called normies, if you want to call them that, normies tend to resent that and bully people for being that way. That's basically what Ayn Rand's books are about, right? Howard Roark is a non-conforming, passionate architect who's bullied by the world, right? Atlas Shrugged is about all the innovators go on strike or whatever. But the problem is the richest people in our society are not innovators, right? Wall Street bankers, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, and the DuPonts, they're not innovators. Right. And that, she projects something that we all see in everyday life, which is people that are passionate and dedicated and creative getting ganged up on and bullied by normies. She takes that and says, well, that's what socialism is. And capitalism is when the creative individuals triumph. Well, that's not what capitalism actually is. But it's a smart projection because it makes sense. And the kind of person who would become a communist is the kind of creative, driven person who feels alienated from society. So Ayn Rand is a brilliant brainworm, to say the bullying that you've endured, the lack of support for your creativity and your originality, that's communism. Well, I would hate communism too if I thought that's what it was. But it's kind of a brilliant psyop in a way, but it's just incorrect, right? The billionaire bankers that run the world, the Western monopolies, are not creative, non-conforming, motor-minded individuals. They're not. And it's funny because this is just like George Orwell. George Orwell and 1984 is the same thing. It just doesn't focus on economics, right? Orwell focuses on thought control and social conformity. Ayn Rand focuses on economics, but it's the same thing. And that Ayn Rand, she reflects one version of what you call petty bourgeois fatalism, right? Petty bourgeois fatalism. Boy, there's a Marxist phrase that you can take to the bank, right? There's a highfalutin petty bourgeois fatalism. Well, after World War II, it became clear that the big monopolies and the communists were going to dominate the world. And so the petty bourgeoisie, the small business owners, said the future is bleak. There is no hope. And so dystopianism, 1984 by George Orwell, Ayn Rand's novel Anthem, it was we're going to lose our individuality and we are going to be crushed. We're going to lose our individuality at the hands of the working class or the hands of big capital. And they're both the same. And the beautiful individuality of the middle class will be crushed. Petty bourgeois fatalism. And it's actually a lot like the Trots, and it's interesting because this was some of the most brilliant political education I got, right? There was a friend of mine when I was in the Workers' World Party who was not a member of the Workers' World Party. He wanted to join, they wouldn't let him. And he had been in the Socialist Workers' Party. And he and I studied The Struggle for a Proletarian Party by James Cannon. And we studied the Shachtman split in the SWP that gave rise to the neocons, right? Irving Kristol and all these people were Shachtmanites. I mean, this is what this book is about. And I learned about petty bourgeois fatalism, and I learned to struggle against my own petty bourgeois fatalist tendencies. That I had grown up with that. Petty bourgeois fatalism has become kind of the ideology of the United States. You read 1984, it's required reading in school. You read Anthem, and that philosophical irrationalism and petty bourgeois fatalism, this belief in the individual above all else that Dugan calls out, he calls out liberalism, that's practically the state religion in America. And it was spoon-fed to me as a kid. My parents were small-town liberals, right? My parents both had master's degrees in college, but we lived in a really small town that was mainly very conservative people. And, we were the persecuted intellectuals, right? My dad really liked Inherit the Wind, the play about, the small town school teacher who's arrested for teaching evolution, and that, petty bourgeois fatalism, which is a really big part of post-World War II art and culture. Petty bourgeois fatalism is really pushed hard in the United States. If you go to college, you're going to get spoon-fed Nietzsche, you're going to get spoon-fed Leo Strauss, you're going to get spoon-fed petty bourgeois fatalism, right? And petty bourgeois fatalism, is toxic, right? And from my friend who was in the SWP, we studied The Struggle for a Proletarian Party. I'd already read In Defense of Marxism when I joined the Workers' World Party, and he and I had many conversations about philosophical irrationalism, petty bourgeois fatalism, and he taught me that, and I'm very grateful because a big part of my worldview, and eventually I discovered Dugan and his critique of Western liberal ideology, right? Liberal ideology, whether it comes from Ayn Rand or Leo Strauss or Irving Kristol or George Orwell, liberal ideology celebrates the individual above all else and is fundamentally pessimistic. It views humanity as dangerous, as the enemy. humanity is the enemy, and the great people are the people who don't play by the rules and define reality for themselves. There is no truth. Truth is just defined by individuals. They can make their own truth. And the strongest individuals don't conform and just make their own truth. And Friedrich Nietzsche says colonialism is great because white people are not playing by the rules anymore. They're becoming brutal and savage, the blonde beast, and they're asserting their dominance. They're losing their Christian weakness or whatever. This stuff is really dangerous, right? Philosophical irrationalism, the ideology of Friedrich Nietzsche. Ayn Rand is basically Nietzsche for dummies, right? Nietzsche is much smarter than Ayn Rand, but Ayn Rand is Nietzsche for dumb business school jocks, basically. That's what it is. It's a watered down version of Nietzscheism. It's a watered down version of philosophical irrationalism. But fundamentally, it's anti-populism. Anti-populism. I believe that, yes, there are people like me, like you, that are motivated, smart, dedicated, want to change the world, and that we're not better than everybody else, and we're not persecuted by everyone else. We have a special gift. We have the ability to push forward history. And the masses are the real heroes, right? That's Mao Zedong. He says in the Little Red Book, the masses are the real heroes. And we ourselves are often childish and ignorant. We have a level of understanding. We understand the nature of reality in a way the masses don't. But at the end of the day, the masses are the makers of history. We're not better than the masses, right? We just understand that the masses, don't have the level of understanding. So with our motivation and our position, we have to organize and construct, and it's like a boulder rolling down the mountain. We want to nudge the boulder, but the masses are the boulder, right? And this is the role of the revolutionary, of the vanguard party, right? And the role of the revolutionary is not to be afraid of the masses and view the masses as the enemy. It's not to look down on the masses and want to rule over them. It's rather to understand the masses of people in their millions are the makers of history, but we have a special role to play in guiding them. Right? We give voice to the sentiments of the era, right? And this is, if you read the heroism and the role of the heroic in history, this is if you read, there's a lot, right? Plekhanov, if you read Plekhanov's writings, if you read all this stuff, right? That the role of the revolutionary is you're not just like the masses of people, but you have a special role to play. And you're very important, but the masses are ultimately the real heroes. And that's an important thing to understand. I hope that was helpful to you, Kate. Long answer. I had a lot to say, but, that's because I care about these things. All right. Richard says, 2 questions. Parallels between the Iraqi and Syrian Ba'ath split and the Sino-Soviet split, number 1. And number 2, why trying to separate Russia and China now is less possible? Well, the first thing, I don't know enough about the Syrian and Iraqi Ba'ath split. I will say that it appears to me that one of the major differences is that in Syria, the Ba'ath was very, very communist aligned and Soviet aligned, whereas in Iraq, the Ba'ath and the communists were very much at odds with each other, right? And Iraq aligned with the United States much more consistently than Syria did. But I don't know. I do know that, Saddam Hussein's rise to power was very much defeating the Syrian-aligned faction of the Ba'ath, and that the founder of Ba'athist Arab socialism, a Syrian guy named Michel Aflaq, sided with Saddam Hussein and moved to Iraq. I don't know enough about Ba'athist Arab socialism, and very little of it is available in English. So, I don't know enough about it. In Syria, they maintained that Michel Aflaq was not actually the creator of Ba'athist Arab socialism. They found another Syrian that they gave credit to it. Iraq, Michel Aflaq lived there, and Saddam Hussein's government claimed they were the true Ba'athists. So I don't know enough about it. They had the same ideology, and that one of the tragedies of the Middle East, right, is that in the Middle East, in every Arab country, you have the Ba'athist Arab Socialist Party, you have the Arab Socialist Party, the Nasserist Party, and you have the Communist Party, right? And all 3 parties believe basically the same thing. They want an anti-imperialist government that centrally plans the economy and aligns the country with anti-imperialist countries. They want a secular government that is fighting for the independence of the people, and it's the same shit, right? Baathism, Arab socialism, Marxism, Leninism, like, they basically believe the same thing, but they kill each other. And that's how the imperialists control the Arab world, right? Is that sometimes the imperialists would be friendly to the Ba'ath Party, and sometimes they'd be friendly, believe it or not, to the Communist Party because they were having détente with the USSR or whatever. And sometimes they'd be friendly to the Arab Socialist Party. And different factions in the ruling class and different foreign intelligence agencies manipulate all these different groups against each other. But in the Middle East, generally, you have two strands of politics since the end of the Second World War. In the Middle East, you generally have two forms of politics. You have the anti-imperialist secular movements, and you have Islamism, right? Arab socialism, Baathism, communism are secular movements. They want a non-religious government, and they want a centrally planned economy, and they tend to be built up support within the military. They tended to be sympathetic to the USSR, and they fight for Arab people, the Arab liberation, Arab nationalism, Arab independence, right? That's generally what you had in Arab countries, right? Whereas then you have Islamism, which rejects all nations. It says it's for religion. Islam brings people together. Tends to be the ideology of the merchants, many of whom are not Arabs, some of whom are Turkmen, some of whom are Kurds, etc. So it rejects Arab nationalism because they're not Arabs, and Islam is for everybody. Anyone can convert. And it tends to be, the merchants and the middle class elements, and they love free market capitalism, and they think communism is the greatest evil. Because it's atheist, and that capitalism would be fine if everyone was religious, and that the United States is more Muslim is more Islamic than the Muslim countries are, and that free market capitalism is the expression of the Islamic way of being, and that the Arab countries are poor because they've gotten away from the Islamic way of being, but America is prosperous because the way we live is in line with Islamic teachings. Right, that's what the Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood types, believe. Okay, now obviously there's other forces. There's Shia Muslims, there's Wahhabis, etc. But generally, in most Arab countries during the Cold War, you had secular anti-colonial forces and you had Islamists. Right, Islamists were the Muslim Brotherhood. The secular anti-imperialists tended to be Baathists, tended to be communists, tended to be Arab socialists. And, that's generally the two poles of politics in the Middle East. Now, that's how it was. The communist parties tended to be very, very much taking direction from the Soviet Union, right? And really only in Yemen did the communist Marxist-Leninist parties actually take power. Right. In South Yemen, the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen, you had the Communist Party that was the ruling party. It's now called the Yemeni Socialist Party, but they were the Communist Party. They were in power. But in Iraq and Syria, it was Baathism. In Egypt, Abdel Nasser was not a Baathist, but he was an Arab socialist. Gaddafi comes out of the same current, right? But he's what he called an Islamic socialist or a Kibbist. Right. And that's the Green Book. Right. And the ideology of the Green Book is another interpretation of secular Arab anti-colonialism, whatever. And then Gaddafi eventually broke with Arabism and called himself African. Those were the movements that were the anti-colonial and nationalist movements. Now, a common trope, just throwing this out there, a common trope among Zionists is to claim that all these movements are Nazi. All right, this is a really common trope among Zionists. They claim, well, the Ba'ath Party, they're not communists, they're national socialists. That's not true. They were of the left, right? They denounced fascism. They admired the Soviet Union. They were not. Baathism was left, was a leftist ideology. Arab socialism was a leftist ideology, right? Gaddafi's Kibbism, Islamic socialism, was a left ideology. But a common lie, Zionists love to play games. Well, these people are all national socialists. They're not, right? Now, anti-Semitism, is there a lot of anger at not just Israel, but the Jews in these countries? Absolutely. But that's pretty universal. You get that from the Muslim Brotherhood, too. You get that from a lot of people because Israel is considered the main threat and Israel is oppressing the Palestinians. And, and
politics in that region is also very ethnic. So when they think of the Jews, they're thinking of Israel because that's, they're thinking ethnically. So, but the idea that all these Arab anti-colonials forces are Nazis, that's a really common trope in Zionist propaganda, and it's not accurate. The second question, why can't Russia and China be separated? Because they're economically tied to each other, right? Russia is an energy producing country, right? And China is an industrial country. And both of them have been heavily sanctioned by the United States. China needs to buy oil and gas, and Russia needs to sell oil and gas. And the USA has tried to push both of them out of the global economy and make it hard for Russia to sell oil and gas to other people. So they're going to sell it to China. The USA has tried to make it hard for them to import oil and gas from other people. So they're going to import it from Russia. And it's not about ideology. In the 1950s and early 60s, when the Sino-Soviet split happened, China was still very poor, and it was reliant on the Soviet Union. Okay, and so the Soviet Union tried to dictate the foreign policy of China, and that there were foreign policy differences, right? That Khrushchev wanted to pursue détente with the West, and China was committed to global anti-colonial revolutions. And Khrushchev's doctrine of the three peacefuls. Basically, Khrushchev said that people don't explain this. A lot of people that read about the Sino-Soviet split, they don't really understand what Khrushchev was saying. They say, well, Khrushchev believed in the three peacefuls: peaceful transition from capitalism to socialism, peaceful competition, and peaceful coexistence. And Mao believed you could never have a peaceful revolution. You wanted to have a violent revolution. That's not actually what the difference was. Go and read Long Live Leninism. All right, a Chinese Communist Party document, right? Go read Long Live Leninism. Go read Critique of the General Line, right? You read either of those documents. The difference is not that Mao wanted a bloody, violent revolution and Khrushchev didn't. That's not the difference. The difference is that Khrushchev said that because of the atomic bomb, you couldn't have a war between the socialist and capitalist countries. You couldn't have revolutions anymore because the USA had the atomic bomb. And that capitalism is just more efficient. I'm sorry, socialism is just more efficient than capitalism. It can produce more material goods. And that Western countries would come to see this and would then gradually just transition to socialism themselves because they saw that socialism was more efficient in the socialist countries. That was Khrushchev's strategy. We will bury you with material goods, right? We will just show that we can make cars and TV sets better than you can. And they couldn't, right? The USSR was not at the level of development that America was at. And it was a failed strategy. And the idea that the capitalists would just say, oh, you're right, the Soviet Union, they have a better system. You know what? Nationalize our property, social. That's not going to happen. Right. And that Khrushchev was basically giving up the notion of class struggle. And he was saying that it was just going to be a persuasive argument. Right. And that you couldn't have a fight you had to have peaceful coexistence because the nuclear bomb made it too dangerous. The USA and the Soviet Union had a nuclear bomb. And if there was a war, there'd be a nuclear war. So we got to call off active anti-colonial revolutions. But we're going to have peaceful competition, and the Soviet Union will just prove that production is better. And as a result, they'll gradually become a peaceful transition in the West. That's what Khrushchev's doctrine was. Okay. And that Maoist people and people who think they understand this really oversimplify it. And the interpretation that you get is generally, oh, see, Mao wanted a violent revolution. Khrushchev wanted a peaceful transition. That's not actually what they said. And if you read Long Live Leninism, I'll put it in the chat. If you read Long Live Leninism, Mao also wanted a peaceful revolution. He just said it's highly unlikely, but if it's possible, you should pursue it. Right. So, if you read Long Live Leninism, Mao wanted a peaceful transition to socialism. He said it's not highly likely, but when it's possible, take it. And he also said that it was the duty of revolutionary movements, working class movements in the first world, to align with the anti-colonial movements of the third world and to smash imperialism, right? And to build a united front, right? Go and read these documents for yourself, right? The crude interpretation you get from people. Mao said violent revolution, whereas the Khrushchev just wanted peaceful transition. That's not actually what it was. That's a crude oversimplification. No, advocating a peaceful transition is not revisionism. No, revisionism is thinking that socialism will come about gradually out of the imperialist system. Revisionism is not opposing imperialism. Revisionism is saying that the Western system will just kind of naturally turn into socialism. And when the word revisionism was invented, it was considered to be a positive thing, right? Edward Bernstein thought it was a good thing. He called himself a revisionist, and he came up with this theory that capitalism in the advanced Western countries just kind of naturally turns into socialism. And that's revisionism. And Edward Bernstein was very proud to be a revisionist, and revisionism was wrong, right? And when China called the USSR revisionist, they said, your doctrine of the three peacefuls, that's the ideology of Edward Bernstein. You're practicing revisionism, right? So, there's a level of nuance to this that people don't get, right? Revisionism isn't just a slur. It's not saying you're straying from the holy word of Marx. No, they're accusing him of adopting a deviant form of Marxism from the 1800s, right? And their objection is not that the Soviet Union opposed violent revolution. It was that they were putting forward a theory to guide the global communist movement that was not consistent with reality. Okay. All right. Anyhow. Okay. Next question. David Fox says, I would like to hear your thoughts on the recent meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, especially signing critical mineral deals and AUKUS. Well, all I can say is AUKUS is bad for the world. I didn't follow all the details of that meeting. I should go in and investigate and do a more thorough response on future streams. But Australia joining AUKUS, right? The US, UK, Australia alliance against China, hosting US military hardware, threatening China. That's a dead end for Australia. You know that, David. I'm just saying that for everyone at home, watching. But, AUKUS is a dead end. And, Australia should assert its sovereignty, right? Just like in America, we're trying to assert our sovereignty against the globalist imperialist system. Australia should do the same. And that joining up with the USA and the British Empire against China is a dead end for Australia. And it's economically a bad end as well. And you probably know more about how that's hurting Australian workers. So there you go. There you go. Patricia Leary says, really love your latest lectures. Thanks for all you do. Well, thank you. I do my best. Some nights I come on here with a plan. Other nights I come on here with not much of a plan. Tonight I didn't have much of a plan. Last night I had, a plan. So I don't know. I just come on here and, some days I wake up and I'm feeling it and I can just talk. Other days it doesn't come as naturally. But, hey, you got to do what you got to do. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you appreciate the work that I do. And I'll keep doing it, right? Keep coming back to this channel. Keep buying coffees. And thank you for buying me a coffee, right? Buying coffees, helps me pay the bills and pay for CPI events and stuff like that. Trying to figure out how to get this hotel reserved for January 11th. I got to get the hotel reserved. It's eating me alive. I need to get the hotel reserved. It's like eating me that it's not done yet. But there we go. All right. There we go. But thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Kinky. I do appreciate it. And John McCarthy says, House Judiciary Committee Jim Jordan just sent a criminal referral to the DOJ for John Brennan for lying to Congress. Well, there you go. John Brennan's an interesting character. So John Brennan, he's an Irish American. He was CIA director under Obama. And he made a big show of saying he didn't believe in torture. He did not believe in torture. And that was, they were trying to clean up the image of the United States. Under Bush, the U.S. government had tortured people and openly justified it and bragged about it. And Brennan was trying to clean up the image of the CIA. He thought it was not in America's interest to torture, or to at least be known as a torturing country. Gina Haspel, who came to lead the CIA under Trump, she was pro-torture. And that was one of the main differences between like the Obama, Brzezinski liberal faction and Bush was, should America be known as a torturing country?
right? The Bush people wanted America to be known as a torturing country, and Obama wanted America to not be known as a torturing country. It's not a question of should they actually torture people. It's a question of, is it in our image or not? Okay, is it good for our image? And I think that the Bush people with the neocons, there was an element of like rule through terror, and they thought it would be good for people around the world to be terrified of being captured by the United States because they might be tortured. Whereas, Obama and all of them thought that was a really bad thing for the image of the United States. Obama, right? Obama appointed John Brennan. John Brennan bragged that he voted for the Communist Party USA in his first presidential vote in 1976. The other thing that's interesting is that John Brennan headed the CIA bureau in Saudi Arabia for many years. And there are rumors that John Brennan converted to Islam. Okay. And when John Brennan was appointed, the Republicans all said he's a Muslim. And there were a number of like whistleblower Republicans who claimed he was a Muslim. And again, so what? I mean, Muslims can be intelligence officials too, right? But the rumor, not confirmed, was that when he was leading the CIA office in Mecca, or in Saudi Arabia, they wanted to do spy work in Mecca. But the law in Saudi Arabia is to go into the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, you have to be a Muslim. So John Brennan and another group of CIA agents all converted to Islam. Now, did they mean it or not? There's a movie that came out and called Zero Dark 30. And do people see the movie Zero Dark 30? Zero Dark 30 was a disgusting propaganda film. It was about how they killed Osama bin Laden. And it claims that they tortured, they got the info about where Osama bin Laden was through torture. And at the time the movie was made, the CIA actually came out and said, that's not true. We did not get the information about where bin Laden was through torture. That's in the movie. There's also a scene in the movie Zero Dark 30 where they're in the CIA headquarters in Langley, and they walk by an office, and they see you see from a distance a white man doing Muslim prayers in his CIA office. And many people have alleged that whoever made Zero Dark 30, it was obviously Bush-aligned people who believe in torture, because they made it sound like torture is how they got, the information on bin Laden, which is not true. So the film is trying to promote torture. It's alleged that whoever made the movie was outing John Brennan as a Muslim with that scene. I don't know, right? Zero Dark 30. Hollywood is very much spookland. It's very much intelligence controlled. And the movie Zero Dark 30 was, it was the Bush faction that believes in torture, and it was something. And that it's alleged that scene, in Zero Dark 30, where they pan over, Langley, and there's somebody praying Muslim prayers on a prayer mat. It's alleged that is outing John Brennan as a Muslim. I don't care if John Brennan's a Muslim or not. And I honestly don't care that he voted for the Communist Party USA in 1976. I care that he cooked up the lie called Russiagate, and that he made up the lie that Russia interfered in our elections. And John Brennan has said horrendous things about Russians. He said that Russians are genetically engineered to push for war and to be conspiratorial, and he's done a lot of... John Brennan is pretty despicable in a lot of ways, but he's a liberal, right? And he might be a Muslim, and he voted for the Communist Party. And that's the thing. The CIA, the liberals are at this point, are the main danger. Now, that might change, of course, but right now the liberals are very much the main danger, right? And that they're the more effective evil. Black Agenda Report, the website, they said Obama is not the lesser of two evils. He's the more effective evil. And I think they're right. I think they're exactly right. And that the alienation that Americans have against the FBI and against endless wars is largely voiced by conservative movements at this time. And that's why we have to get out of the left. And that's why I spent a whole hour on this stream talking about the RCP and their stupid strategy of aligning with no kings and Trump derangement syndrome. Because, unfortunately, just because of how things are, and not unfortunately, it's just a reality. It's not a matter of unfortunately. It's just
in America right now, people that oppose the FBI, people that oppose World War III against Russia, people that are questioning mainstream media tend to be on the right, largely because of that cancel culture. Because of, just like they do into the RCP, just like they've done to us, you're not allowed to be on the left and question anything. If you question COVID, if you questioned anything on the left, they call you a Nazi and a white supremacist, and you're basically forced onto the right. And on the right, you're still allowed to question things. So yeah, that's really all there is to that. John sent another Rumble rant, or another coffee he sent in. Last Thursday, the UNGA passed a resolution against colonialism. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Loading. On October 16th, the Fourth Committee of the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution, International Day Against Colonialism in all its forms and manifestations. It had been drafted by a group of friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations with Russia's active contribution. The document was co-authored by 23 nations, among them Algiers, Angola, Botswana, Togo, the Republic of South Africa, alongside members of the group of friends. The day of December 14th was chosen for the day on purpose. It was the 65 years ago when, with the USSR's decisive role, the historic UN Declaration on granting independence to colonized countries and peoples was adopted. Very cool. Very, very cool. That's great. I think that's great. And we should use the day against colonialism of the UN. We should use that to do something. Maybe we should have rallies or something, right? I think we ought to do something. Because we should draw attention to that. That's good that the UN has a day against colonialism. We can talk about what colonialism actually means. Penny says, Burkina Faso news. Polytechnic school opened with the aim of industrializing Burkina Faso. Made Burkina Faso hygienic cotton facility restored. They're builders. They're constructors. The Union of Sahel States. They kicked the ass of the French imperialists, and they're building, building, building. I love Ibrahim Traore. Go buy Penny's book about, her great book about Ibrahim Traore and his work and his anti-colonial, government in Burkina Faso. Great stuff. Great stuff. All right, folks. Well, listen, as you can see, my nose is running. I've got allergies and I've got a little bit of work I have to do before I go to bed. So I am going to say good night for now, but thanks for everyone who asked questions. I really do appreciate it. It's very helpful. I hope that my insights tonight were helpful and, yeah, dare to struggle, dare to win. Mark your calendar for January 11th. I'm going to get that hotel booked soon, and you can start registering for the event. Join the Center for Political Innovation. We always need new members. Dare to struggle, dare to win. I'm going to put on the closing music. You guys are awesome. I love my CPI community. You guys are great. We're building a real movement. Thanks to everyone who was in the streets this weekend saying, hands off Venezuela. Great work. Dare to struggle, dare to win, and good night. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.